Chapter 9-10. After Black Saint escape. Almost at the same time, the extremely gloomy Ku Xian and the Black Tortoise led the great saints of their clans away from the path to the heavens without saying a word. Soon, fearful of Feng Yu and the two martial gods' remnant thoughts, the rest of the great saints also left and went to the battlefield of the martial gods. At this moment, only Feng Yu and the two extraterritorial evil souls were left on the 9,999 steps of the path to heaven. Feng Yu and the two extraterritorial evil souls faced each other from a distance. After a short silence, Feng Yu frowned and finally spoke. "Why aren't you two making a move?" Hearing this, the two extraterritorial evil souls were so angry that they laughed. "Ha ha! You little kid, do you know why the heavenly palace was destroyed 100,000 years ago? Why did the two supreme martial gods fall into a 100,000-year-long slumber? All of this is our masterpiece. Just now we saw that you were holding the scarlet flame divine sword, so we were a little worried. In truth, a little kid like you is nothing in front of us." The two extraterritorial evil souls sneered and said. As soon as they finished speaking, their godly figures scattered like fragments. These were just afterimages. The two extraterritorial evil souls had already made a move. Good. They finally made a move. Then let me see what you're capable of. With that, Feng Yu summoned the Scarlet Flame Divine Armor, and held the Scarlet Flame Divine Sword in his hand, surging his combat strength to its peak state. Looking around, he didn't see the two extraterritorial evil souls at all. Feng Yu frowned. If he couldn't see them, how could he start a fight? However, this wasn't a problem for Feng Yu. Buzz. The system panel slowly opened. Feng Yu looked at the slaughter treasure chest. On the map, there was a picture of the two extraterritorial evil souls' treasure chest. He rubbed his eyes in disbelief. They escaped? No. These two guys ran to the battlefield of the martial gods. Feng Yu exclaimed in a low voice. On the constantly refreshed map, the picture of the two extraterritorial evil souls' treasure chests had already flown far away and were no longer in this place, and their target was the battlefield of the martial gods in the distance. Feng Yu had been fooled. Those two evil souls from the outer realm had been putting on an act all along. They didn't have many means to deal with Feng Yu. Buzz. Just as Feng Yu was about to explode with rage, the system space began to tremble uncontrollably. Then, two shattered masks covered in cracks flew out and headed in the direction of the martial god battlefield. These two masks were the martial god masks that he had obtained from opening the black iron treasure chests earlier. There was a bright sun and a cold moon on them. Damn it! He's chasing after us. This guy, how can's reaction god? The two extraterritorial evil souls looked at Feng Yu in disbelief. Their faces were filled with shock. They soon noticed the two pieces of the martial god masks flying toward the martial god battlefield too. Crap! The hearts of the two extraterritorial evil souls sank. They had given up on Feng Yu and headed straight to the battlefield of the martial gods, as they were afraid that Feng Yu would awaken the two martial gods with the two masks. In order to prevent their plan of 100,000 years to fail, they had increased their speed to reach the battlefield of the martial gods before Feng Yu did and occupy the bodies of the two martial gods. However, things did not go as they wished. The two martial gods' masks were chasing after them. Asshole! Execute the secret technique and give up part of the authority of the Heaven Palace. That way we won't have to worry about the suppression of the key in his hand. We'll be able to kill this kid. And the two masks, we'll destroy them outside the battlefield of the martial gods. The two extraterritorial evil souls exchanged glances with one another and swiftly came to an agreement. Bang! In the air, outside the battlefield of the martial gods, the two evil souls suddenly came to a stop. A terrifying aura surged from the two extraterritorial evil souls. At this moment, the entire Lingyun realm was trembling. The roars of ancient gods and demons could be heard from the bodies of the two extraterritorial evil souls. A broken heaven jade bone was ejected from the bodies of the two extraterritorial evil souls before it exploded into pieces. The heaven jade bone was almost identical to the one in the soul-refining demon emperor's hand. However, the words Heavenly Lord were engraved on the bone jade bone. As for the bone jade bone in the soul-refining demon emperor's hand, it was blank. Apart from some ancient runes, the words Heavenly Lord were not engraved on it. Without the broken bone jade bone, the two extraterritorial evil souls were surrounded by a black aura as if they had lost the thing that was suppressing their power. Let's show you our true strength. Ha ha! Heavenly Highness Archfiend, descend. The two evil souls roared as their bodies collided with one another. They were executing an eerie combination superpower. Bang! A terrifying aura surged at this moment. Fang Yu stopped in his tracks as he stared at the scene before him in shock. His face was filled with disbelief. How can this aura be so powerful? Boom! Within the black fog that filled the sky, a burly figure that was thousands of feet tall walked out calmly. He was covered in black scales and had two ferocious heads on his shoulders. He also had 4 pairs of arms, each holding a saber, a spear, a sword, and a halberd. This 1,000-meter-tall archfiend exalted celestial was still in soul form, but it was extremely solid. Fang Yu believed that it could even take on a peak great saint body refiner. Look! Look over there! What a terrifying aura! This should be at least the combat power of a peak great saint. Isn't this beyond the upper limit of the Lingyun realm? How can someone of this level not be expelled by the Lingyun realm? Outside the martial god battlefield, many great saints had slowed down and were still standing outside the entrance of the battle god battlefield. They were all shocked by this scene. The terrifying archfiend Heavenly Venerate had 2 heads and 4 arms, and his aura was unstoppable. People would believe it if someone told them that he was as strong as a great emperor. Die. The 2-headed, 4-armed Great Malevolence, who was transformed from 2 evil souls from outer space, gave Fang Yu a ferocious smile, then slapped him hard with both hands. Boom! Fang Yu's body was sent flying backward, falling from the sky and crashing into the ground, causing dust to fly everywhere. Ha 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 ha! You're just an ant! Kid, weren't you very arrogant just now? You even took the 2 of us seriously. Who do you think you are? How dare you be so arrogant? The 2 evil souls laughed loudly, their faces filled with unbridled arrogance. They didn't even look at the ground. After that, they executed a secret technique and drove the Heavenly Highness Archfiend toward the entrance of the battle god battlefield. Chapter 9:11. In the eyes of the 2 extraterritorial evil souls, the Archfiend Heavenly Venerate was the strongest technique they could use. His physique was as strong as a peak great saint's physique. His combat strength was comparable to an emperor's. He had both offense and defense, and was extremely difficult to kill. Even if it exceeded the upper limit of Lingyun realm, it could not expel them, because they were too strong. That palm strike from before was more than enough to annihilate a dozen peak great saints. Killing Fang Yu was not a problem at all. Perhaps those 2 damned masks, along with Fang Yu, had all been smashed into smithereens. In the end, there was no need to look. Fang Yu was definitely going to die. However, the result was always beyond their expectations. Behind the Archfiend Heavenly Venerate, endless dust was stirred up. In the huge deep pit, Fang Yu crawled up unscathed. Fortunately, 10 breaths of time for a 7-star great saint has passed. 60 breaths of time for complete immunity to damage hasn't passed. Otherwise, facing such a terrifying slap, I'm afraid I would have wasted that scapegoat doll. As Fang Yu spoke, he was filled with fear and trepidation. To tell the truth, he did not expect the 2 extraterritorial evil souls, who were so weak and did not have any dangerous aura, to be so terrifying after expelling the broken bone jade. The Archfiend Heavenly Venerate's combat strength was terrifying. It had completely surpassed the Great Saint realm and stepped into the threshold of the Emperor realm. Even if Yunfeng's master, who had refined the Essence Soul Pearl and was a 3-star Emperor, came, he might not be a match for the Archfiend Heavenly Venerate. The Archfiend Heavenly Venerate was definitely a terrifying existence above the 3-star Emperor realm. You too, do you really think I'm dead? In the face of such a terrifying existence, Fang Yu was still clamoring. Anyway, he was currently in the 60 breaths of time for complete immunity to damage. Even if a 9-star Emperor Realm expert came, they would not be able to kill Fang Yu within this time. Who's talking? The two heavenly lords faltered slightly upon hearing this before looking back with bewildered expressions. Immediately, they saw Fang Yu's body floating in the air. Once again, he stood towering in the sky, facing off against them. There was a deathly silence. Other than the fact that Fang Yu's robes were a little tattered and he looked a little disheveled, there was not the slightest injury on his body. That terrifying palm strike just now had not even scratched Fang Yu's skin, let alone taking the life of an ant like Fang Yu. The two arrogant extraterrestrial evil souls were dumbfounded. They wondered if there was a problem with their fusion. How is this possible? Even though we're only fragments of the true great malevolent Heavenly Venerate's evil soul, we're still comparable to 3-star emperors when we use our secret techniques. We were in our peak condition just now. With that palm strike, not to mention a mere great venerate, we were able to kill him. Even a 1-star martial monarch would have been injured by it. The two evil souls were startled. They glanced at Fang Yu with great fear. They were feeling uneasy. In addition to Fang Yu, even the two martial god masks were perfectly fine beside Fang Yu. It was fine if Fang Yu was not injured. However, the two martial god masks that were on the verge of shattering were perfectly fine too. It was quite strange. Kid, you're not bad. We've been dominating this place for over 100,000 years. You're the first time we've encountered someone so troublesome to deal with. Sure. We'll use our full strength today and send you to your death. The two hoarse voices overlapped and echoed throughout the place. Following this, the Heavenly Venerate over 1,000 zhang tall sank his feet deeply into the ground. He exerted force with his 4 arms and threw punches at Fang Yu. Each of the punches could easily turn a peak great saint into ashes. With so many fist images, if all of them were to land on the ground, then not to mention a peak great saint, even a 1-star monarch might perish. Terrifying. This is extremely terrifying. This evil soul is terrifying beyond compare. Fang Yu is also extremely terrifying. He's not even a martial monarch yet, but he's able to face this evil soul head-on. Many great saints were watching this shocking battle from 1,000 li away. However, facing the sky full of fist shadows, Fang Yu did not dodge in the slightest. Instead, he faced the fist shadows 1 step at a time and walked towards the 10,000 feet tall demon. This caused the hearts of all the spectating great saints to tighten, and they couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. They felt their scalps go numb for Fang Yu, and they were terrified to the extreme. What is Fang Yu thinking? There are so many punches. Even a martial monarch would die if he's not careful. This is not something that the martial monarch power sealed in the Origin Spirit Pearl can compare to. He, Fang Yu, is currently fighting against a true monarch's battle prowess. How dare he be so crazy? How dare he be so careless? All the great saints exclaimed in surprise. In the battle, Heavenly Venerate Archfiend looked at Fang Yu, who was almost courting death, with a hint of mockery in his eyes. Ha! Interesting! Courting death. I'll fulfill your wish. Boom! Punches landed on Fang Yu one after another, sending Fang Yu flying. However, before Fang Yu could even land on the ground, a new fist came down on him. Just like that. In midair, Thousands upon thousands of terrifying fist shadows rained down from Fang Yu's body. This time, this ant should be smashed to pieces. He'll die without a complete corpse. This is considered a good ending. Otherwise, we'll pull out your tendons and skin you alive and make you suffer. The two extraterritorial evil souls grinned hideously and kept throwing punches. They were going all out, trying to crush Fang Yu into pieces as soon as possible. However, time passed bit by bit. 1 breath, 10 breaths, 20 breaths. An unbelievable scene was reflected in the eyes of the great saints and the two extraterritorial evil souls. Fang Yu was still fine. Her robe was torn to shreds, revealing her jade-like skin. Heavenly Venerate Archfiend's punches, which could easily break the sky, landed on Fang Yu's body, but they did not even leave a ripple. 20 breaths later, the two extraterritorial evil souls were so terrified that they had to withdraw from the merged state of Heavenly Venerate Archfiend, because they had already exhausted all their strength. This is impossible. Absolutely impossible. You're just an ant from the lower realm. Sometimes you're a 7-star great saint, sometimes you're a peak great venerable, but each of my punches can seriously injure an emperor. Why can't these thousands of fists do anything to an ant like you? Chapter 9:12. Heavenly Lord Archfiend disintegrated. The two extraterrestrial evil souls looked at Fang Yu, who was walking toward them unscathed. They felt their scalps go numb. The unknown was the most terrifying. They could not figure out what means Fang Yu had used to escape unscathed from so many punches. This was what made them shudder with fear. Run! We've misjudged him. This man is so strange. He must be related to the Temple of the Gods. It's not that he doesn't have a deity seal on him. It's just that the deity seal is hidden too deeply and its grade is too high. We can't sense it at all. Even if this Fang Yu had a Godking's brand protecting him, I would still believe that such a strange scene would happen. Otherwise, not to mention great saints and great exalts, even if a 3-star monarch was here, he would have been reduced to ashes by us just now if he only defended without attacking. The two extraterrestrial evil souls felt their scalps go numb. When they saw Fang Yu approaching them, they were scared out of their wits. Without any hesitation, they turned around and fled. However, in response, Fang Yu walked to their side and pressed his hand on their shoulders. His voice was slow, but it was like the voice of a demon demanding their lives. Where are you two going? Are you leaving just like that? Why don't I send you off? Boom! A terrifying suction force came from Fang Yu's body and pulled the two extraterrestrial evil souls into the system space. Ding dong! You have successfully hunted 2 extraterrestrial evil souls. Special reward: 2 scarlet treasure chests. After opening them, you will randomly receive a special card with permanent effect. Special card. Permanent effect. Special reward: scarlet treasure chest. Fang Yu's eyes lit up. Suddenly, he felt that the punches on his body did not hurt as much. Special cards, each of them had a heaven-defying effect. For example, the card that could give a 7-star great sage 10 breaths of time, and the card that could give complete immunity to damage for 60 breaths of time. Fang Yu had seen them just now. Fang Yu was looking forward to a card with no time limit and a permanent effect. If he could get a permanent special card that was completely immune to damage, Fang Yu would be rich. Fang Yu would be able to do as he pleased in this dangerous primordial world where experts were numerous. After all, he was immune to all damage. I'll open the treasure chest now. Drawl, Fang Yu summoned the system interface and immediately opened the 2 flickering scarlet treasure chests. Immediately, a dazzling light appeared. Then, the light dissipated. 2 cards that only Fang Yu could see appeared before Fang Yu's eyes. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a legendary card. Absolute slavery. Friendly reminder: if you use this legendary card together with the broken battle god mask, there will be a miraculous effect. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a legendary card. Absolute Slavery. Friendly reminder: if you use this legendary card together with the broken Battle God mask, there will be a miraculous effect. 2 cards full of dazzling patterns floated in front of Fang Yu. Not only did they look the same, but even the system's notification was the same. Legendary card? Fang Yu's eyes flickered. At this moment, 2 cracked masks with the image of a sun and a moon on top appeared in Fang Yu's hands. As he looked at the 2 legendary enslavement cards and the effects of the damaged Battle God mask, Fang Yu took another look at the Battle God battlefield, a thoughtful look on his face. Fang Yu already had some guesses as to why the 2 extraterrestrial evil souls were here and why the heavenly palace had declined 100,000 years ago. The 2 extraterrestrial evil souls should have escaped from the ruins of the realm of the gods, or perhaps they were related to the realm of the gods. 100,000 years ago, when they came to the 9 realms of the human realm, the 2 extraterrestrial evil souls had been planning to steal the flesh of 2 of the 3 strongest martial gods. 100,000 years ago, they had tricked the heavenly palace into fighting among themselves. The 2 strongest martial gods had turned against each other and fought until the heavens and earth were shattered, resulting in the Battle God battlefield. It was likely that the 2 strongest martial gods had discovered the existence of the 2 extraterrestrial evil souls and their conspiracy when they were trying to steal the flesh of the martial gods. Thus they had isolated the 2 extraterrestrial evil souls from the Battle God battlefield. The 2 strongest martial gods had fallen into a deep sleep, while their true souls had fallen into the cycle of reincarnation, leaving them in a half-dead state. If that's the case, I'm afraid I'll be able to claim the fruits that the 2 extraterrestrial evil souls have been waiting for 100,000 years. Fang Yu's eyes flickered. That being said, it was only his speculation. As for the truth, the 2 extraterrestrial evil souls had already perished in the system space. Thus there was no way they could tell him. If Fang Yu wanted to know the answer, he would have to go to the Battle God battlefield himself. He would know the truth once he met the 2 strongest martial gods. 2 legendary cards, Absolute Enslavement. If I use them together with the effects of the broken martial god mask, I might be able to enslave the 2 strongest martial gods. If that's the case, I'll be able to do whatever I want in the human world of the ancient realm. Even the forces of the martial gods would have to back off when they see me. Fang Yu's mind was filled with thoughts. The ancient realm was the transcendent continent. Legend had it that it was divided into 3 great worlds: the human world, the heavenly realm, and the divine realm. 1,000,000 years ago, when Fang Yu had first arrived in the ancient region, he had obtained a slaughter order of the 10 directions, which allowed him to pry into some secrets related to the ancient god realm. There was also a white-haired man who had given Fang Yu the mark of the god's slaughter, asking him to collect the fragments of the god's slaughter sword and kill the traitors of the divine realm. Currently, in the ancient realm, the divine realm had become a legend. It had not appeared for 1,000,000 years, making it impossible for cultivators to find any traces of the divine palace. The heavenly realm was above the 9 realms of the human world. Since the destruction of the heavenly palace 100,000 years ago, the cultivators of the heavenly realm, who would occasionally descend to the lower realm, did not even descend to the lower realm. If it were not for some ancient martial god forces that could occasionally contact the cultivators of the heavenly realm would have become a legend after 100,000 years. As for the 9 realms of the human world, the forces of the 12 martial gods were like the scorching sun in the sky, overlooking the human world. For 100,000 years, ever since the 3 strongest martial gods had fallen and stepped into the heavenly realm, there was no 4th strongest martial god in the human world. 100,000 years ago, if Fang Yu could enslave 2 of the 3 strongest martial gods, the heavenly martial god and the black heaven martial god, if Fang Yu could enslave the human world, then his forces alone could sweep through the human world. He could dominate the 9 realms and plunder resources for his own cultivation. No matter how strong the forces of the 12 overlords were. Even if they worked together, they would not be able to defeat a martial god with one hand. Black Heaven Martial God. Heavenly Martial God. Fang Yu chuckled. Under the fearful gazes of the great saints, he stepped into the door of the martial god battlefield. Chapter 9:13. The martial god battlefield stood at the center of Lingyun heaven and earth. It was formed from a part of the ancient region's origin world 100,000 years ago. After 100,000 years of evolution, the space of the martial god battlefield was extremely stable. It was so stable that it was a little too heavy. In this place, even great saints would be suppressed. Their cultivation base, strength, and secret techniques were all gone. Those who were truly qualified to maintain their peak condition in the martial god battlefield were those at the martial god realm and above. Of course, there were exceptions. No matter who held the token that contained the authority of the heavenly palace, they would be strengthened in the martial god battlefield where many heavenly palace ancestors had fallen. This boost was sufficient to counteract the suppression from the martial god battlefield. The crimson sky and crimson earth were barren and barren. The barren land was filled with rocks as far as the eye could see, and the air was filled with the smell of blood. Is this the martial god battlefield? As expected of the place where countless experts from the 2 factions of the heavenly palace died 100,000 years ago. The thick smell of blood hasn't dissipated even after 100,000 years. The void distorted. Soon, Fang Yu's figure appeared at this place. Fang Yu sighed as he looked at the crimson world. His brows were tightly knit together. Although he had the key to the heavenly palace, he still didn't know much about the martial god battlefield. He didn't even know as much as the soul-refining Devil Emperor. Groups of great saints had entered the battlefield, and even more than half of the 57 Saint Realm ferocious beasts that had submitted to Fang Yu as servants had entered. However, there was not a single figure in the crimson barren land. Even when Fang Yu followed the senses of the Saint Realm ferocious beasts, he couldn't sense anything. Could it be that all the great saints who entered earlier were killed here? That shouldn't be the case. If it's really that dangerous, the soul-refining Devil Emperor would definitely avoid it. He wouldn't have chosen to step into it. Fang Yu's heart was filled with questions as he moved stealthily through the crimson barren land. His figure was as fast as a streak of light as he tried to reach the end of the crimson barren land. However, he traveled 3,000 miles in the air. Not to mention walking out of the crimson barren land, Fang Yu couldn't even tell the direction. He was lost here. Strange. It's really strange. Fang Yu stood on the spot. His gaze suddenly froze. He saw the mark he had left on the ground when he first set foot on the martial god battlefield. After going around and around the martial god battlefield, he had returned to his original place. Looks like it's time to use this thing. The key to Heavenly Palace. On the martial god battlefield where the experts of the Celestial Palace have fallen, I wonder what kind of effect the Celestial Palace key will have. Fang Heavenly Palaces key Heavenly Palaces domain. Under the current circumstances, if he did not think of a way to create some commotion, Fang Yu would most likely be trapped here until his death. Buzz. Heavenly Palaces key Heavenly secret key. In an instant, resplendent spiritual light erupted, and the boundless crimson wilderness in his eyes suddenly distorted. Heavenly heavens, heavenly sect heaves. I didn't expect you to be so close to the heavenly palace. It seems like the crimson barren land can't trap you any longer. In this endless wilderness, an old voice slowly sounded. Bang! In the next moment, a terrifying suction force emerged. By the time Fang Yu's vision turned black and he opened his eyes again, he had already appeared in another towering, ancient, and incomparably vast ancient hall. At the center of the ancient palace stood 9 statues of martial emperors. They were extremely majestic. The statues were all thousands of feet tall. They were covered in the marks of time and no longer emitted any divine light. It was obvious that the 9 martial emperors had all died 100,000 years ago. Apart from Feng Yu, there were a few other figures in the ancient palace. They were the 2 leaders of the Heavenly Palace's survivors, Old Monster Ku Xian and Old Ghost Gui Xian. In addition, there were 2 other great saints who were trapped in the Lingyun realm. Apart from the Heavenly Palace's survivors, they were not able to leave. Old Monster Ku Xian and Old Ghost Gui Xian were holding artifacts that emitted the auras of the orthodox cultivators of the Heavenly Palace from 100,000 years ago. As for the 2 supreme saints who were trapped in this realm and could not leave, they each had a bone jade in their hands. However, the bone jade was of poor quality. It only had the words envoy on it, and it looked like it was about to shatter. Saint Feng, why is he here at the battlefield of the martial gods? Didn't he infuriate 2 martial gods on the 99,999 steps on the path of heavens? How is he still alive on the battlefield of the martial gods? The 2 great saints of the human race turned pale when they saw Feng Yu. They turned their heads away and started discussing in private. As for Old Ghost Gui Xian and Old Monster Ku Xian, they glanced at Feng Yu and harumphed coldly. They subconsciously turned their heads away. Previously, Feng Yu had allowed them to do whatever they wanted to him. However, the battle prowess that Feng Yu had displayed on the path to the heavens was simply too terrifying. Yun Feng, who had killed a 5-star great saint. Not only did he not die after taking a blow from a martial emperor, but he was also arrogant enough to challenge 2 martial gods' remnant wills, and was still alive. Even though the 2 leaders of the remnant tribes of the Heavenly Palace were unwilling to admit it, they had to admit that Feng Yu and the others might not be able to defeat them. There are 5 of them now. Ah! How many years has it been? It has been many years since the battlefield of the martial gods and the hall of inheritance of the Heavenly Palace were so lively. Since the 5 of them have gathered here, and all of them are related to the ancient celestial palace. Now, it's time for the hall of inheritance of the Heavenly Palace to open. The voice of the old man who had brought Feng Yu out of the crimson wilderness sounded again. Endless waves surged in the great hall. The 9 stone statues of the great emperors glowed with light. An illusory figure of an old man appeared. Let me introduce myself first. We were the guardian true spirit of the Heavenly Palace's inheritance, array 100,000 years ago. Although the Heavenly Palace has been destroyed, the inheritance of the Heavenly Palace cannot be broken. As the guardian true spirit of the Hall of Inheritance, I naturally have to fulfill my duty. 100,000 years ago, when the cultivators of the Heavenly Palace broke through to the Great Saint Realm, the Hall of Inheritance would open for every 5 people. There are countless opportunities hidden by the ancestors of the Heavenly Palace inside. How much good fortune you obtain inside will depend on yourselves. Of course, as the guardian true spirit, I have to remind you, even for the orthodox cultivators of the Heavenly Palace, such an opportunity only comes once in their lives. In the rebirth mirror, you have to choose carefully and choose your own opportunities. The illusory old man spoke slowly. In the hall, except for Feng Yu, the other great saints were indescribably excited. Their breathing quickened, and they were obviously eager to participate in the trial of the rebirth mirror. Chapter 9:14. The true spirit of the Hall of Succession disappeared after finishing its speech. It did not even give Feng Yu any time to ask questions. The old man's figure turned into a light screen and appeared before the 9 statues of the martial monarchs. Who would have thought that the Hall of Succession of the Heavenly Palace would appear in the battlefield of the martial god? It's a great opportunity for the survivors of the Heavenly Palace. The trip to the rebirth mirror will definitely be fruitful, even if I have to leave the battlefield of the martial god. The harvest from the rebirth mirror is worth the trip. As old monster Ku Xian, old man Gui Xian, and the others were about to enter, Fang Yu stepped forward with a frown and blocked their way. What is this place? And what is the rebirth mirror you mentioned? Facing Fang Yu's confusion, old monster Ku Xian and old man Gui Xian sneered without any intention of answering. A cultivator from the outside world, an ant from the lower realm, had stolen the authority of the sect leader of the heavenly palace. It was enough to make them clench their teeth in hatred. They didn't want to see Fang Yu in the slightest. In fact, they even wanted to kill Fang Yu after snatching the sect master's key. At this moment, how could they possibly answer Fang Yu's question? If it were not for the fact that Fang Yu's strength was too powerful, they would have already gone past Fang Yu and entered the world of the rebirth mirror. While the situation was in a stalemate and Fang Yu was starting to get impatient, one of the other two great saints of the human race walked out of the hall with his head bowed and his back bent as he explained to Fang Yu in a fawning manner. Senior Saint Fang. 100,000 years ago, the heavenly palace was the strongest faction in the mortal realm. It has a long history and has been passed down for 900,000 years. It has a strong foundation and has produced great geniuses in each generation. It's said that it relied on the rebirth mirror. According to ancient records, the reincarnation mirror hidden here is a treasure left behind by the heaven realm. The first master of the heavenly palace relied on the opportunities in the reincarnation mirror to cultivate the cultivators of the heavenly palace. Only then did he single-handedly establish the heavenly palace as the #1 force in the world in the future. At this point, the human race great saint paused for a moment and looked at Fang Yu. The fawning look in his eyes became even more pronounced. Seeing this, Fang Yu looked around at the other people in the hall and took in their expressions. He immediately knew what this human race great saint wanted. "What's your name? After you come out from the rebirth realm, just follow me. With me protecting you, no one will dare to act rashly, and no one will dare to touch the treasures you obtained." Fang Yu's mouth was full of empty words as he promised. However, in fact, Fang Yu's real cultivation was only a peak great venerable. Among the many experts who had entered the martial god battlefield, he was the weakest guy. If not for the heavenly palace key in his hand, it would be difficult for Fang Yu to break through the seal of the martial god battlefield with his weak cultivation. However, such empty words made the faces of the other great saints in the hall change slightly. The human race great saint's face was filled with ecstasy. He almost knelt down and kowtowed to Fang Yu on the spot. "Thank you, great Saint Fang. My name is Qin Kong. 30 years ago, I was an external consecrator of the Jian clan, the overlord sect of the martial god battlefield in the Xianfeng domain." After Qin Kong finished speaking, he saw that Fang Yu was a little impatient, so he continued to talk about the opportunities in the reincarnation mirror. The Jian clan is one of the 12 overlords of the martial god battlefield. The ancient records in the clan have a few words about the reincarnation mirror in the heavenly palace. The reincarnation mirror in the heavenly palace contains a small world, where all living beings are born and countless fortunes are hidden. Cultivators of the heavenly palace enter to train and stay for 10 years. When they leave, they can choose an item in the mirror world to bring back. At that time, you will be the opportunity for this trip. There are even rumors that more than half of the 7 god-level unique treasures of the heavenly palace were brought out from the reincarnation mirror, Qin Kong slowly explained. At the side, after old monster Ku Xian and old monster Gui Xian heard this, they looked askance and could not help but say sarcastically, "Haha, little guy, you are very knowledgeable and your cultivation is not weak. Unfortunately, you don't have the spirit of a martial Dao cultivator. Are you so eager to be someone's dog?" Old monster Ku Xian's face was full of sarcasm. Among so many people present, he was the only one who had interacted with Fang Yu before and knew a little about Fang Yu's background. Although he was wary of him, he was not afraid of him like a tiger or a wolf. A few days ago, he was still imprisoned in their clan and was suppressed, unable to escape. In the blink of an eye, he had become a terrifying expert, approaching the martial emperor realm. This was too big of a leap. Others might believe it, but Ku Xian did not. Being a dog is better than being someone's dog. His own nest was destroyed. He came here aggressively for revenge, but when he encountered the opportunity of the reincarnation mirror, he came here eagerly, not even caring about his blood feud. Ha ha! In this regard, Fang Yu also ridiculed. These words not only angered Ku Xian, but also old monster Gui Xian, who also agreed with the conditions, was full of anger. Fang Yu also scolded him. The soul-refining demon emperor blew up the nests of the 3 clans and sacrificed 30,000 elite cultivators of the heavenly palace. Perhaps only an idiot like Black Saint would disregard everything and only want to kill the thief for revenge. In their opinion, the soul-refining demon emperor. The soul-refining demon emperor was nowhere to be seen, and it was difficult to find him in the martial god battlefield. Only the opportunity of the reincarnation mirror in front of them could be seen and touched. However, the fact that Fang Yu had pointed it out made the two of them extremely angry. Unfortunately, they were not sure about Fang Yu's strength, so they did not dare to make a move. Humph! I don't want to talk to a brat like you. Although the sect master's key in your hand has great power in the heavenly palace, it can't affect the world in the reincarnation mirror at all. In the end, you will gain nothing and may even return empty-handed. You are just a cultivator from the lower realm. At that time, the reincarnation mirror will reject you and give you an extremely low-level world. After Ku Xian and old monster Gui Xian finished cursing, they stepped into the light curtain of the reincarnation mirror, while Fang Yu was not paying attention. Others did not know about the secrets of the reincarnation mirror in the heavenly palace, but as the 3 clans of the heavenly palace, they knew many secrets. When 2 people stepped into the reincarnation mirror at the same time, there was a high chance that they would be in the same world. At that time, the difficulty would also increase, and they would be able to obtain a higher level of fortune. At the same time, both of them were survivors of the heavenly palace, so they knew many things to take note of. They could also meet in the world of deduction and work together to search for higher-level treasures. Lord Saint Fang. Then the 2 of us will go in too. Qing Kong and the other human race great saint were anxious when they saw that Ku Xian and Ku Xian had stepped into the reincarnation mirror before them. They cupped their hands at Fang Yu in a perfunctory manner, and then stepped into the light curtain of the reincarnation mirror. At this moment, only Fang Yu was left in the main hall. No hurry! No hurry! The light curtain of the reincarnation mirror will not disappear anyway. Why don't we explore the main hall first before going in? In the majestic ancient palace, Fang Yu was walking slowly by himself. Chapter 9:15. In the ancient hall, Fang Yu walked alone, his gaze fixed on the murals carved on the stone walls of the hall. In fact, Fang Yu was not very interested in the opportunities in the rebirth mirror. After arriving in the ancient region, the new function of the system, the slaughter treasure chest, was much more interesting than the rebirth mirror. Most of the 7 unique treasures came from the rebirth mirror. Was it very powerful? One had to know. When the slaughter treasure chest had just finished upgrading, Fang Yu's first broken treasure chest had upgraded by 3 times and became a gold treasure chest. He had opened a Scarlet War God armor set. Scarlet War God armor set. Among all the God-tier treasures, it was considered one of the best. After all, according to the 2 extraterrestrial evil souls, the Scarlet War God armor set was most likely a true god from the Pantheon Palace, a powerful existence with a divine seal. How could a god-tier armor set that could be related to the legendary realm of the gods be ordinary? 7-star Saint Battle Power Card. The time is still too short. Otherwise, with Ku Xian's tribe, Chu He's and Chu Lai's silver treasure chests, I would have been able to harvest them on the path to heaven. Fang Yu muttered with a regretful expression. He was not very interested in the rebirth mirror. At this moment, Fang Yu was looking for a way to leave this place. After all, he still planned to use the legendary card and the broken war god mask to enslave the two ultimate war gods. However, at this moment, something unexpected happened that Fang Yu did not expect. Bang! An incomparably intense burning sensation surged out. Even with Fang Yu's tenacity, he could not help but cry out in pain at this very moment. What's going on? What is this? The slaughter god seal is burning? Rolling up his sleeves, Fang Yu saw that the four-cornered god slayer token imprint on his arm was glowing at a terrifying speed, and it was growing stronger and stronger. As the light grew stronger, the burning sensation became stronger. Could it be? There's one of the four slaughter god's sword fragments in this palace. Fang Yu raised his head and looked around. There was no way he would forget the trip to the mysterious space during the slaughter order. The terrifying corpses were over 10,000 zhang tall. Every single one of them was at the martial god realm or even above the martial god realm, and according to the level of the bones, it was enough to be said to be piled up like a mountain, a sea of blood overflowing into the sky. There was also that crazy yet terrifying white-haired man sitting cross-legged on the chessboard. He would never forget it for the rest of his life. It was as if the disappearance of the god realm had something to do with this white-haired man. Where is the god-slaughtering sword? Fang Yu's gaze suddenly froze as he stared in shock at the scenes depicted on the mural in front of him. Hundreds of millions of feet high in the sky, a crimson meteor pierced through the 9 layers of clouds in the heaven realm and came crashing down from the heaven realm toward the 9 realms of the human realm. In an instant, the meteor fell from the sky. A kingdom with a territory of 1,000,000 li was reduced to ruins. An extremely young cultivator in a white robe was passing by. He accidentally found a sword fragment the size of a palm in this place that had almost turned into a prison of death. No, that was not the case. It looked like a fragment of a sword blade. On a night with a full moon, the young cultivator in a white robe was being hunted down. He accidentally found the sword fragment and was immediately sucked into it. It was the first time the young cultivator in a white robe had entered the world of the sword fragment. Only 3 days had passed in the human realm. However, 30 years had passed in the world of the sword fragment. The young cultivator in a white robe had experienced countless hardships in the world of the sword fragment. His temperament had gradually matured. He even found his first god-level rare treasure in the world. As a result, a terrifying cultivator in a white robe had appeared in the 9 realms of the human realm. A few years later, the cultivator in a white robe had reached the martial god realm in the human realm. He started to establish a sect and established a prototype organization called the Heavenly Palace. A sword fragment? The rebirth realm. How is this possible? The famous rebirth realm that was recorded in the ancient books is actually a fragment of the god-slaying sword. Isn't this a little too unbelievable? Fang Yu's face was filled with shock. He had imagined what it would be like to find a fragment of the god-slaying sword for the first time. However, he had not expected it to be so terrifying. Fang Yu was a little frightened. When the first master of the Heavenly Palace had just established the Heavenly Palace, his cultivation was not even at the peak of the 9-star martial god realm. He was just an ordinary martial god. In the days that followed, the Heavenly Palace continued to establish one peak after another. It had never declined in the past 900,000 years. The only time it declined was when the 2 strongest martial gods fought each other and destroyed the Heavenly Palace on the spot. The reason why the Heavenly Palace was called a legend was not because of the inheritance left by the first master of the Heavenly Palace or the god-level rare treasure. It was because of the rebirth realm. Who would have thought the famous and terrifying rebirth realm was actually a fragment of the god-slaying sword? Unbelievable! This is unbelievable! The mark of the god-slaying sword on his arm was still burning. It seemed to be urging Fang Yu to search for the first fragment of the god-slaying sword as soon as possible. Originally, Fang Yu had wanted to leave to search for the two strongest martial gods. But now it seemed like he could not go. "I will go! I'll go, all right?" Fang Yu shouted. Fang Yu had searched every nook and cranny of the entire hall. If there were any hidden places, they would not be able to escape Fang Yu's eyes. In the hall, if there was a place where the fragments of the god-slaying sword could be hidden, it could only be in the world of the god-slaying sword. A fragment of the god-slaying sword could create a miracle in the heavenly palace that would never decline. I wonder how powerful the other fragments of the god-slaying sword would be. Fang Yu walked toward the light screen of the rebirth realm. At this moment, when he imagined his journey to search for the fragments of the god-slaying sword, he felt his scalp go numb. If the incident 100,000 years ago had not happened, with the rebirth realm in hand, the heavenly palace would never decline. Now it was the most powerful force in the human world, the martial god. If Fang Yu wanted to search for the fragments of the god-slaying sword, he would have to take away the rebirth realm, which was of utmost importance to the heavenly palace. If it were the cultivators of the heavenly palace, they would not be willing to do so. Fortunately, the heavenly palace had been destroyed 100,000 years ago. Otherwise, Fang Yu would definitely die. With the size of the heavenly palace, it would be easy for them to kill a cultivator from the lower world. According to the murals, when one enters the mirror world, he will lose his memory. Only when he grows up will he have the chance to regain his memory. I wonder how long it will take for me to regain my memory. Life is too hard. Fang Yu sighed. Although he did not want to go, for the fragments of the god-slaying sword, he stepped heavily into the light screen and disappeared from the hall. After Fang Yu left in the ancient hall, the old man slowly walked out of the 9 stone statues of the great emperor. 100 years ago, when I first obtained the fragments of the god-slaying sword, I knew that after 1,000,000 years, someone would come to the heavenly palace to retrieve the fragments. Young man, are you that person? Chapter 9:16. In the Mirror World, Chuzhou City, Tianhe County. In a towering mountain range, there was a young man carrying the corpse of a beast that weighed hundreds of kilograms on his shoulder. He was moving forward slowly. After a long time, the young man carried the beast's corpse and appeared in a village. "Grandpa, Grandma! I'm back!" The young man threw the beast's corpse away, cheered, and walked toward the village. His name was Fang Yu. He was born with great strength and extraordinary freedom. He could read and write since he was born. If it weren't for the fact that Xiaxi village was too poor and remote and didn't have much financial resources, the villagers would probably send this young man to cultivate martial arts. A young man who had shown extraordinary talent from a young age must be talented. Once he started cultivating martial arts, he would be able to advance by leaps and bounds and become a prodigy. If he didn't die prematurely, he would definitely lead the martial arts world in a region. "Grandpa! Grandma!" the young man shouted again. However, the village was still dead silent. There was no movement at all. This made the young man a little panicked. What was going on? Normally, the ancestral grandpa and grandmother would have appeared a long time ago to bring this beast corpse back to the village to be used as rations for the villagers. Today it was dead silent. The young man quickly rushed into the village. The pungent smell of blood. Everywhere he looked, there were hideous and terrifying corpses. The villagers were dead. They were all dead. There was no one alive in the entire village. "Grandpa! Grandma!" When the young man ran back to his house with his body trembling, he saw the 2 corpses in front of the door that had been gnawed on. Anger, sadness, hatred, and all kinds of negative emotions finally burst out. Boom! The young man cried blood and walked toward his family. The corpses were cold. There were no signs of life. They had been dead for half a day. Why, Grandpa and Grandma are just the most ordinary people. In this remote village, they are very satisfied with being able to eat and not have to worry about food and clothing. Why did the disaster still come here? In his chest, there was a surging killing intent. At this moment, something in the young man's heart broke. Who am I? Fang Yu. I'm Fang Yu. This is the mirror world. I am Fang Yu, a cultivator from the lower realm. I came from the ancient domain, the Lingyun realm, and the martial god battlefield. I set foot in this mirror world to search for traces of the god-slaying sword fragment. Fang Yu woke up in the mirror world. However, drop after drop of tears continued to roll down Fang Yu's face. Fang Yu reached out to take it. Tears streaked across his palm and fell to the ground. He couldn't stop them no matter what. This is fake. This is the mirror world. Everything is fake, an act. But why, even though I know all of this, looking at my grandfather's corpse, I still feel so sad. I hate it so much. I think I killed someone. Even if you know that this is a mirror world. At this moment, Fang Yu rose to his feet. His face was covered with a bitter smile, and he couldn't stop the tears from flowing out of his eyes. Da-da-da! The sound of horse hooves could be heard. They quickly approached the village that had been reduced to a land of death. Very soon groups of cultivators in white outfits with righteous auras from reputable factions showed up. They looked at the corpses all over the ground inside. Those evil disciples of the soul refining sect are really crazy. In order to capture the souls of mortals, they controlled their evil spirits and slaughtered ordinary people. Lunatics! Those evil disciples are all lunatics. They all deserve to be killed. None of them deserve sympathy. The young man leading the group of disciples in white cursed viciously. However, soon, a few white-robed disciples returned from patrolling the area and reported to the white-robed first senior brother. Senior brother, there's a survivor here. It's a 17 or 18-year-old young man. It seems that he was scared out of his wits in this catastrophe. I asked him, but he didn't answer me. He just kept crying. The disciple in white reported. Hearing that, the senior brother in white who was leading the group had a sad expression on his face. He paused for a moment and a look of astonishment and bewilderment appeared in his eyes. Thereafter, he quickly covered it up and returned to his usual appearance. Where is that young man? The senior brother in white asked in a gentle tone. Under the lead of the junior brother, they soon saw Fang Yu, who was hugging two corpses and crying non-stop. It turned out that he was just an ordinary person. The senior brother in white's eyes flickered and he was relieved. Hence, he walked forward quickly and said gently, "You must be scared out of your wits, kid." Sigh. During this period of time, the evil disciples of the soul-refining sect have become more and more arrogant. In order to kill people to cultivate and obtain a stronger cultivation level, they don't even let off ordinary mortals. Kid, don't worry. As the senior disciple of the Heavenly Feather sect, I, Su-Han, will definitely not shirk from this matter. I will definitely avenge you and kill this group of evil cultivators. The senior disciple of the Heavenly Feather sect, Su-Han, said righteously. At the side, the disciples of the Heavenly Feather sect were all in awe and admiration. He's indeed our senior brother. He has a righteous spine and can't tolerate evil cultivators like the soul-refining sect at all. That's right. Our senior brother has reached the great martial master realm in his 30s at such a young age. He's not far from the connate martial spirit realm. It won't be long before there will be a place for our senior brother Su among the righteous geniuses in Chuzhou City, not to mention the Tianhe County. The praises were endless. All the disciples had looks of reverence on their faces. Hearing these words, the senior disciple of the Heavenly Feather sect, Su Han, had a humble look on his face. However, at this moment, Fang Yu raised his head and looked at him. His voice was faint, like a 1,000-year-old ice that emerged from the 9 serenities. Since you are a righteous person, then why did you kill my grandfather, my grandmother, and all my relatives in the village? Why do you have the blood of my clansmen on your body? You keep saying that you want to expand the righteous path and help the evil cultivators. But why did you kill my clansmen? Fang Yu's tear-filled eyes were filled with coldness and bone-chilling hatred. Buzz, the first disciple of the Heavenly Feather sect, Su Han, had a sorrowful expression on his face. The righteous aura that he exuded disappeared at this moment. His cold eyes stared at Fang Yu. He stared at this little mortal. When I slaughtered the villagers and refined their souls, you weren't there. How did you know that I killed your clansmen? You're ruining my reputation. You little mortal, you're going to make me kill another one. Fang Yu's face changed drastically, but the disciples turned around at the same time and pretended not to see. After all, the competition between the sects was fierce. Their senior brother killed demons and defended the Tao in the day, and became an evil cultivator at night, killing people everywhere to cultivate. Their sect master also acquiesced in this matter. Chapter 9:17. You know all of this. Then you can go to hell. The eldest disciple of the Tianyu sect, the reputation of the righteous sect, is not allowed to have the slightest stain, Su Han said ferociously. A palm pressed down hard on Fang Yu's head. With just a little bit of force, this mortal without any cultivation would be turned into a corpse. Ha ha! How pitiful! This little kid really thinks that we are righteous. The true righteous path never lives for long. This little kid also found out that our eldest senior brother killed people to practice. He is dead. With his mortal body, it is impossible for him to resist. The disciples looked on coldly and whispered a few words of ridicule from time to time. Fang Yu looked over. Everyone here was repulsive. They did nothing. They saw it with their own eyes and pretended not to see it. They were all accomplices. They all deserved to die. You all deserve to die. An extremely cold and bone-piercing hatred burst out from Fang Yu's chest. Fang Yu's eyes were red. He looked at Su Han fiercely and also looked at his outstretched palm. Boom! At this moment, Fang Yu's realm rose on its own. The peak of the martial disciple realm. The peak of the martial mentor realm. The peak of the great martial mentor realm. The peak of the innate martial spirit realm. In an instant, a mortal who was as weak as an ant and had no cultivation at all became as strong as an expert at the peak of the innate martial spirit realm. At this level, at the age of 17 or 18, not to mention in Tianhe County, even in the vast land of Chuzhou City, it was enough to be called a genius. Impossible. When I was killing, I found out that this village was full of poor people. For 3 generations there was not a single cultivator. Unless you are the reincarnation of a powerful person, it is absolutely impossible. Su Han's expression was one of extreme terror. However, he had no chance to say a word. Bang! Blood splattered everywhere. Fang Yu pressed his palm on his head, opened his skull, and tore his brain to pieces. Monster! No. This guy killed senior brother Su Han. He's a demon. Some disciples cried out. Everyone wanted to form a sword formation to kill Fang Yu, but they were afraid of Fang Yu's cultivation, which was at the peak of the innate martial spirit realm. They immediately fled in all directions. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't understand. How could a mortal boy suddenly become so strong? You, and you guys. All of you must die. All of you must die. Fang Yu roared madly. Boom. Punch after punch. He was like a ferocious demon wolf. His body was like lightning as he continuously flew up and down, throwing out punch after punch. There were traces of blood all over the ground. All of the Heavenly Feather sect disciples present were dead. Not even their corpses were left. Their hearts are all rotten. Tianhe County, on top of a towering mountain, Fang Yu stopped in his tracks. He chewed a few mouthfuls of the stinky heart and casually threw it on the ground. At the top of this mountain there was a sect. There were 3 big words written on it. Heavenly Feather Sect. Ask all the disciples and elders of your sect to come out and accept their deaths. Fang Yu smiled hideously. His face was filled with madness and hatred as he walked step by step into the mountain gate of the Heavenly Feather Sect. A few days later, the Heavenly Feather Sect was filled with blood. All the sects in Chuzhou City received the news. In Tianhe County, there was a suspected reincarnation of an evil cultivator. He killed people everywhere to cultivate. So far, he had slaughtered a mortal village and the entire Heavenly Feather Sect. Many Orthodox sects in Tianhe County joined forces and wrote a letter, asking the more powerful sects in Chuzhou City to send overlords to kill this demon. A few more days passed. The 3 major sects in Chuzhou City finally reached an agreement and decided to kill the demon while he was still young. They didn't want the demon to grow up and endanger the sects in Chuzhou City. However, when the leaders of the 3 major sects, as well as the elites and prodigies, arrived at the mountain gate of the most powerful Crimson Tiger sect in Tianhe County, they found the Crimson Tiger sect had been razed to the ground. More than 1,000 skulls were piled up high in front of the mountain gate like a mountain. Go to the Hanshua sect. The leader of the 3 major sects in Chuzhou City said coldly. The team changed their destination. But they found that the Hanshua sect was even worse. There was no one there. There were only skeletons left. Their flesh and blood had been removed. What a demon! The 2 strongest sects in Tianhe County have almighty martial kings who are not weaker than our strongest leaders. In the end, they were still slaughtered. Looks like this demon can't be underestimated. He's not the reincarnation of a grand cultivator. He's a peak-stage martial ancestor or the reincarnation of a transcendent. The demon slayers were scared out of their wits. That night, they returned to Chuzhou City under the leadership of the elders. However, Chuzhou City was high up in the sky, and the corpses of the 3 largest sects were piled up like mountains. At the very top of the mountains was a young man, wearing a white robe stained with blood. He stood there quietly. It seemed that he had been waiting for them for a long time. You're finally here. I've been waiting for you for 3 days and 3 nights. Fang Yu grinned coldly, revealing his teeth. Boom. After a long time, the elites and prodigies also turned into corpses. The only martial emperor who had managed to hold on under Fang Yu's attack, but was on the verge of dying, grabbed Fang Yu's foot with trembling hands. He shouted angrily. Why? Fang Yu was indifferent as he viciously stomped on the man's palm and crushed his head. Divine slaughter, divine slaughter, divine slaughter. What I've experienced is merely the reincarnation of that white-haired man, the master of the godly slaughter sword. Since all of you are here, then you must be the ones who are guilty in his memory. You all deserve to die. Only by killing all of you can I vent the crazy hatred in my chest. Divine slaughter, divine slaughter, divine slaughter, divine slaughter, divine slaughter. Ever since he woke up and killed Su Han with his own hands, Fang Yu had come to a realization. What he had experienced and the hatred he had inherited was real, because this was the memory of the previous divine slaughter sword's young man. From the Tianhe County to the Chuzhou City, I killed everyone I wanted to kill. The previous divine slaughter sword's master. Is this your memory? Is this all you have? Fang Yu looked up at the sky and mumbled to himself. After wiping out all the sects in Tianhe County, Fang Yu discovered that the secret vaults of the sects had all contained treasures of high grade. There were even many royal grade treasures. At this moment, The cultivators of the three sects in the Chuzhou city were all killed by Feng Yu. In the Chuzhou city, the countless figures that were moving about were all gone. In the sky above Chuzhou city, a long sword and 4 other types of weapons slowly appeared. It was a monarch-grade weapon and 4 supreme-grade sacred weapons. Chapter 9:18. The Emperor-grade weapon and 3 supreme-grade sacred weapons in the sky above Chuzhou city were the rewards Feng Yu had received from the mirror world. 100,000 years ago, the cultivators of the heavenly palace were qualified to enter the rebirth mirror world. They had entered the world of the god-slaying sword fragment. All of them were at the Great Saint stage. Many of them had to wait until they reached the peak of the Great Saint realm before they could use the precious trial spot. Feng Yu, on the other hand, was only a great venerable when he entered the mirror world. He was not even a great saint. If not for the god-slaying mark on Feng Yu's body, Feng Yu might not have been able to enter with his weak cultivation. A great venerable trying to break through. This was the extent of the world he had created. It was pathetically weak. The strongest cultivators of the 3 major sects in Chuzhou city were only at the peak of the martial ancestor realm. In fact, Feng Yu did not even need to fully recover his cultivation base. He could easily find a way to pass through this world in 6 days and kill them all. This is an Emperor-grade weapon and 4 supreme-grade sacred weapons. Given your cultivation, it will be a worthwhile trip for you to leave with these 5 weapons. In the sky, the void distorted. The illusory figure of an old man slowly appeared. It was the old man who had claimed to be the guardian sacred spirit in the Hall of Inheritance. As the first master of the heavenly palace, you are still obsessed with the god-slaying sword fragment after you passed away. You even used your remnant soul to refine yourself into the guardian sacred spirit. You are very brave, Feng Yu said indifferently as he raised his head to look at the old man. Feng Yu had guessed the old man's identity long ago. However, after going through the mirror world, he vaguely learned about the first master of the heavenly palace through the god-slaying mark in his hand. The first master of the heavenly palace was not even qualified to use the fragment, let alone wield the god-slaying sword. He had encountered the god-slaying sword fragment and discovered such a wonderful use. This could be said to be the blessing of the first-generation master of the celestial palace through several lifetimes of cultivation. You know me? Hearing Feng Yu's words, the old man's expression changed slightly. 100,000 years had passed. Along the way, there were a few people, either great saints or monarchs, who had entered the battle god battlefield and the Hall of Legacy by chance. He obediently carried out his duty of guarding the true spirit. His identity might be exposed. This was the first time he had experienced being exposed by someone with a single sentence. The new Godly Slayer Sword Master who came to collect the Godly Slayer fragments is indeed extraordinary. However, even if you want to take back the God-killing sword fragment, it won't be so easy for you to take it away from the heavenly palace that has controlled it for nearly 1,000,000 years. The first master of the heavenly palace sneered. His body immediately disappeared into thin air. The godly slaughtering sword fragment has been in his possession for 1,000,000 years, and he actually found a way to infiltrate it? It was this sliver that allowed the first-generation master of the heavenly palace to see how mighty and terrifying the previous master of the godly slaughter sword was. Therefore, he doesn't want to let go of the godly slayer sword fragment even more, Feng Yu slowly guessed. And everything that he had guessed was pretty close to the mark. The first-generation master of the heavenly palace who had obtained the godly slayer sword fragment was still alive, and he was still trying to get his hands on it. This made things difficult for Feng Yu. No wonder the heavenly palace key isn't so useful in the battle god battlefield. It turns out that the first-generation master of the heavenly palace, the creator of the patriarch key, has been secretly setting me up. As soon as Feng Yu finished speaking, at this moment, the entire world began to distort. Then, like a mirror, it shattered with a loud bang. The Emperor-grade armament and the 4 top-quality sacred armaments also shattered and disappeared. A new world in the mirror was taking shape. It had been so many years. All the cultivators of the Heavenly Palace came here to train. Even the first master of the Heavenly Palace could only come here once, and that meant they could only experience one side of the mirror world. However, Feng Yu was different. They had been chosen by the previous master of the Godly Slayer sword to inherit it. Feng Yu could even challenge it countless times. It was a pity. Feng Yu did not want to waste so much time. After all, he still wanted to find the bodies of the 2 supreme martial gods, who were in hibernation, and take them as his subordinate. Then, he would be invincible in the 9 zones of the human realm. It was better not to waste too much time on the Godly Slayer sword fragment. Clear all the stages in one go. Take the Godly Slayer sword fragment. That was what Feng Yu was thinking. The first-generation master of the Heavenly Palace also knew what Feng Yu was thinking. To this, the first-generation master of the Heavenly Palace sneered with a hint of mockery. Ha ha! Clear all the stages in one go. Do you think you're worthy? Back then, when I obtained the Godly Slayer sword fragment, I went through 30 years of reincarnation in the world of samsara again and again. In the end, I succeeded in obtaining the godly grade treasure and walked out. So what if you're the new master of the Godly Slayer sword? If you can't walk out of the world of samsara, you'll still be trapped here forever. In the second world of samsara. The Grand Xian Dynasty. The Cloud State City. The Chu family. Feng Yu, you're just a son-in-law. Your status is even lower than a dog's. If you didn't have some talent, how could my ancestor take you in? You piece of trash, you should at least have some self-awareness. In my Chu family, you're no different from a servant. You're just a little higher than them. In the spacious courtyard, there was a woman. Although she was beautiful, her face was filled with arrogance. She was pointing at the nose of a man and cursing non-stop. All sorts of profanities were spewing out. However, regardless of how the woman cursed at him, the man by the name of Feng Yu continued to look at her with a gentle gaze. Little Qian, if scolding me can make you feel better, then continue scolding me. I'm sincere to you. Why would I be afraid of such scolding? The man was as gentle as water. However, in Chu Qian-er's eyes, he was as disgusting as a fly. She scolded him again and again. She had originally thought that she would be able to provoke this prodigy and make him leave in anger. Then, he would sever all ties with her as husband and wife. Unexpectedly, this prodigy, who fought his way from the Chu state city to the Grand Xian dynasty, was so patient. Was he after the Chu family's assets? Chu Qian sneered with a mocking expression. Don't even think about it. He was just a prodigy born in a poor province in the lower domain. How could he be worthy of her high and mighty Chu Qian? Wishful thinking. Poor and pedantic grass. He was not worthy. Chapter 9:19. Humph. Do whatever you want. However, you still can't get on my bed tonight. I don't like you at all. Go back to your kennel and sleep. If you dare to come tonight, don't even think about getting close to me in the future. Even if my grandfather comes looking for me, I won't agree to meet you again. After she finished speaking, the woman flipped onto the horse arrogantly, raised the horsewhip and left the Chu family. To this, the man was still deeply in love as he watched the woman leave. He walked out of the courtyard and came to the front of another small house. Next to this small house was another small house, and inside it was a 7-headed evil flame demon hound that had reached the level of a half-king, although it was a half-a-king demonic beast. But in reality, the house next to it was really a kennel. The man didn't care about this. He calmly entered the small house next to the kennel and sat down cross-legged to cultivate. However, all he was thinking about was how to please his nominal wife tomorrow. Everyone in Cloud State City, including old Master Chu, thinks that I haven't made any progress in these 3 years and that I'm still at the peak of the martial king realm. But in reality, no one knows that I'm already at the peak of the martial king realm. I'm only a step away from the martial ancestor realm experts that don't even have half a step in Cloud State City. When the time comes, I'll definitely give Qian a surprise. The man smiled as he thought about it. The night was quiet. A bright moon hung high in the sky. Cloud State City, King Ye's mansion. On the bed, there were 2 bodies intertwined together. One of them was the Chu family's eldest young miss, Chu Qian, who was in the courtyard during the day. Darling Yi, you're one of the 7 kings of the Dashuan dynasty. Your achievements are outstanding and your prestige is unparalleled. Even the current emperor has to show you some respect because you're very likely to step into the martial ancestor realm this year. You'll become the Dashuan dynasty's 3rd martial ancestor guardian. Darling Yi, if you ask, my grandfather will definitely give up on this useless son-in-law and marry me to you. Chu Qian, who was incomparably arrogant during the day, didn't have the slightest bit of arrogance in front of King Yi at all. She was just like a little girl. King Yi smiled and agreed to this matter. When the 2 of them finished putting on their clothes, they didn't notice. On the beam, a white-clothed figure appeared. At this moment, this young man was so angry that his body was trembling and he felt dizzy. This person was none other than Fang Yu. I woke up again? Fang Yu closed his eyes in pain. When he opened his eyes again, the memories of his real self had already surged into his mind. The world of Arceus. Transcend the continent. Martial god battlefield. God-slaying sword. The mirror world. There was also the previous Heavenly Palace Master. Fang Yu remembered everything. However, in this life, he still inherited the remnant emotions of the body. It was a kind of betrayal, a pain like a venomous snake biting into his heart. This pain drove him to the brink of insanity, and he wanted to start a massacre. However, the woman he loved was not included among the people who had started the massacre. Strange! What is this thing? Fang Yu sensed his body and found a worm-like thing in the depths of his heart. For a moment, even with Fang Yu's knowledge, he didn't know what it was at all. Just as Fang Yu was about to peel off the worm in King Ye's mansion. However, there was a figure who walked in calmly under the cover of the night without alerting a single guard. Such a cultivation. It could be said that this person was one of the strongest people in Cloud State City. The person who came was old Master Chu, the person who wanted Fang Yu to be his son-in-law. King Yi, how dare you? I Chu have a strict upbringing. After you obtained Cloud State City as your fief, I have never offended you at all. This old man has also fully cooperated with your orders. Do you know that this old man's granddaughter is still a virgin? Moreover, she has even promised to have a husband. The old man who came in had white hair and a beard. As he stood in the house, he looked at King Yi, who had an ambiguous relationship with his granddaughter, with a face full of anger. It was as if old Master Chu was here to catch them in the act. Ha ha! Old Master Chu, why are you angry? Fang Yu, that brat from the lower province, was merely controlled by your love gu. He hasn't made any progress in 3 years. I'm afraid that even you are a little impatient with him. After all, old Master Chu, this is the first time in all these years that you have made a mistake. Since that's the case, why don't you give up on that trash's roots and let your Chu clan marry me, King Yi? King Yi walked toward old Master Chu and said slowly with a smile. Old Master Chu rubbed his chin. He had not expected that King Yi would be able to see through all of his schemes. Tonight, he had even exposed all of them. At the side, Chu Qian's face was full of disgust when she talked about Fang Yu. Grandfather, that guy is just a shabby brat from the lower province. He's still a martial king after 3 years. He's really a piece of trash. Your granddaughter finds him disgusting when she sees him. Why don't you just kill him with the love goo? This way, your granddaughter can marry a great hero like King Yi. Fang Yu had fallen in love with Chu Qian because of the love goo. Chu Qian also knew about this matter. A woman's heart was the most vicious. This Chu Qian was so vicious that she wanted to kill Fang Yu, who was deeply in love with her. This was simply vicious to the extreme. This matter needs to be handled properly. This brat is also a great genius. Although he has lost a lot of his splendor in the past 3 years, if he were to die suddenly, I'm afraid that it would leave behind a bad reputation. Old Master Chu slowly said. Clearly, he agreed with his granddaughter's idea. Kill Fang Yu. Ally with King Yi. Without hesitation. Buzz. On the roof beam, Fang Yu's body trembled and his face was full of disbelief. I've been poisoned with the love goo. Everything I liked was fake. Old Master Chu, who was always kind and amiable, was actually also faking it. Now, the two of them, whom I see as my closest kin, actually want me to die. Fang Yu laughed maniacally. When he knew that he had been poisoned with the love goo, it had already been removed. At this very moment, recalling the events of the past, Fang Yu felt so angry that his body trembled. He was a great genius. From the lower province's Chu Prefecture city, he had killed his way to the central province's Cloud Province city and stopped at the Grand Xian dynasty. He had defeated all the young geniuses of his generation and became a true peerless genius. His future should have been limitless. However, he had inexplicably fallen in love with Chu Qian whose beauty could barely be considered decent. He had even been so obsessed that he had abandoned his martial path and become a live-in son-in-law of the Chu clan. Now, everything about the change in his temperament could be explained. Chapter 920. Deep in the courtyard of King Ye's residence, Old Master Chu, Chu Qian and King Yi were secretly plotting how to kill Fang Yu without alerting too many people. Little did they know. Fang Yu, the main character, heard everything that was going on behind the scenes. After a long time, the three of them finally came up with a plan. At this very moment, the surging killing intent that had accumulated in Fang Yu's chest finally reached its boiling point. Facing the night, Fang Yu laughed miserably. Ha 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 ha! How laughable! My clan was massacred when I was young, and then I was framed by the so-called righteous path. They speak of benevolence, righteousness, and morality, but in reality, they are the murderers of my clan. After I killed all the murderers and enemies, I killed my way from Chuzhou City to Cloud State City, wanting to start anew. I didn't expect to be used again. Laughable. Truly laughable. Fang Yu roared. It was this roar that shook the entire King Ye's residence, and even half of Cloud State City. All the cultivators of the aristocratic families in Cloud State City knew about Fang Yu, the prodigy of the past, and now the good-for-nothing son-in-law of the King Chu's residence. Ha ha! Fang Yu, your live-in son-in-law is just a good-for-nothing who lives in a dog kennel. Why are you howling in the middle of the night? An expert from King Ye's residence walked out with a sneer. This expert from King Ye's residence was the chief steward of the King Ye's residence. His cultivation had reached the peak of the martial king realm, and he knew that he was stronger than his good-for-nothing son-in-law who had not made any progress in 3 years. Moreover, he knew a thing or two about his master secretly hooking up with the first miss of the Chu family. Naturally, he did not treat Fang Yu well. However, Fang Yu, who should not have dared to curse at him as usual, turned his head at this moment and stared straight at him with his scarlet eyes. You insulted me. I'll take half your life. So, do you think it's reasonable? Under the moonlight, Fang Yu's voice was as cold as ice, as if he had been possessed by a demon. His appearance was completely different from the past. You, the head steward of the Wang mansion, who was at the peak of the martial king realm, looked at the frightening Fang Yu and took a step back in fear. But very soon, When he realized what had happened, he wanted to slap himself. He was the head steward of the Wang residence, and he was even stronger than this good-for-nothing son-in-law. Why would he be afraid of this guy? Bastard. This is the prince's residence, not a place where a good-for-nothing son-in-law of the Chu clan can come. Get out of here. Go back to your kennel in the Chu clan. The chief manager cursed loudly. At the same time, he finally made his move. A terrifying peak martial emperor realm aura was unleashed at that instant. Boom. In an instant. A giant Yuan Qi hand, carrying a malevolent killing intent, aimed for Fang Yu's head. Even if it didn't hit the ground, it was enough to injure Fang Yu's internal organs. However, in response, Fang Yu just slowly stretched out his palm. Then, he suddenly pressed down. In an instant, heaven and earth collapsed. A terrifying airwave rose to the sky, and nearly half of the Wang mansion was razed to the ground. The head steward of the Wang mansion, who had just insulted Fang Yu, was smashed into meat paste by this palm print. Not even his bones could be seen. Fang Yu, the good-for-nothing son-in-law of the Chu clan, is actually so strong? How is this possible? This is definitely not the martial king realm. Even a martial royal realm cultivator can't do it so cleanly. Only a peak martial royal realm cultivator can have such strength. Many experts near the Wang mansion were alarmed and discussing. They looked at this good-for-nothing son-in-law in disbelief, who didn't dare to fight with anyone. They didn't expect. This good-for-nothing, who was rumored to have not made any progress in 3 years, had secretly cultivated to such a level. A peak martial royal realm cultivator. In this huge Yunzhou city, perhaps only old Master Chu and Wang Yi had such a terrifying cultivation. The Chu clan is going to be rich. One clan with 2 martial royals. And they are both peak martial royal realm cultivators. Chu Qian this slut, has been seducing Wang Yi all the time. She actually has such good luck and found a treasure. She found such a young husband who is already a peak martial royal realm cultivator. In the crowd there was a lot of discussion. They were amazed by Fang Yu's strength and the Chu clan's good luck. However, in the Wang mansion that was almost in ruins, old Master Chu and Wang Ye's faces were extremely gloomy. He heard it all? Ha ha! It seems like he heard it all. I didn't feel the love goo's aura in his body. It seems that he heard our conversation and the love goo has been removed. The two of them whispered, but there was a murderous look in their eyes. This kind of scandal must not be exposed. As an aristocratic family, the Chu clan cared about their reputation. It was the same for the Wang mansion, especially Wang Yi, who was about to break through the martial ancestor realm and become the grand guardian of the Dexian dynasty. At this juncture, there must not be any problems. This Fang Yu must be killed. However, he had to find a good reason. After all, there were so many experts of Yunzhou City watching in the open and in the dark. If there was no proper reason, the tricks in this matter would soon be seen through. When the time came, first, he would use the love goo to control the genius. Then, he would go crazy and want to kill this son-in-law. He wanted to marry twice and form an alliance with Wang Yi. If this matter got out, the Chu clan and Wang Yi would no longer be able to survive in the Dexian dynasty. Fang Yu, what are you doing? You actually demolished Lord Ye's house. Is this something that a lowly and useless son-in-law like you can do? Hurry up and kneel down and apologize to Lord Yi. I Chu Qian order you. At this time, Chu Qian angry voice had already sounded. In the night sky, it was especially loud. However, hearing this, old Master Chu's face turned green. Most of it was because he was frightened. Chu Qian was not beside the two of them just now and did not know what they were talking about. Therefore, she did not know that the love goo in Fang Yu's body had been removed. At this moment, Fang Yu was a peak martial emperor expert. The terrifying genius from 3 years ago had returned. Just as old Master Chu's heart was pounding, Fang Yu walked down from the air and looked at Chu Qian. There was still a warm smile on the corners of his mouth. Could it be that the love goo was too deeply poisoned? After 3 years, even if the love goo was removed, he knew that everything was fake. This Fang Yu still has deep feelings for Qian. Seeing that Fang Yu was still the same, old Master Chu let out a sigh of relief. At the same time, he started to think. Since Fang Yu was still a genius, he was also a peak martial emperor. Compared to the 100-year-old Yi Wang, his potential was many times stronger. It would be best to continue the marriage with Fang Yu. Chapter 921. A young man in his 20s who was already a peak martial emperor compared to King Yi, who was only a peak martial emperor at the age of 100. Even a fool would know how to choose. A peak martial emperor in his 20s. At such a young age, Fang Yu had entered the ranks of the experts in the Dexian dynasty. In time, if Fang Yu did not die prematurely with his age, he would definitely reach the martial ancestor realm in the future. Even, he had enough opportunities. It was possible for him to become a peak martial ancestor and step into the great venerable realm that had never been seen before. Ha ha! Our Chu family is also a big family. How can a woman marry 2 men? In an instant, old Master Chu weighed the gains and losses and made a decision in his heart. However, he had forgotten. The foundation of all his plans had to be built on the fact that Fang Yu still loved Chu Qian. At this moment, there was no love in Fang Yu's heart. There was only unforgettable hatred. King Ye's residence, which was almost in ruins. Fang Yu was dressed in a white robe and his body was tall and straight. He no longer looked like the good-for-nothing son-in-law of the past. The corners of his mouth carried the usual gentle smile as he slowly walked in front of Chu Qian. Ha ha! Even if you are a peak martial emperor, what can you do? In the end, you are still a dog under my skirt. With the love goo in my body, I, Chu Qianer, am your master. You will do whatever I tell you to do. Chu Qianer's face was full of cold mockery. She looked down at Fang Yu with ridicule and disdain in her heart for Fang Yu. At this moment, she did not know. The love goo in Fang Yu's body had been removed. Disperse! Disperse! A good peak martial emperor was actually scolded like a dog by Chu Qianer. Looks like this son-in-law of the Chu clan didn't even have 2 minutes to show off before he turned back into a good-for-nothing. TSK, I really don't know what to say. Around King Ye's residence, the experts who were watching the show felt disappointed. After all, in Cloud State City, Fang Yu's reputation as a good-for-nothing son-in-law was very well known. Whenever he was in front of Chu Qianer, he would be scolded like a dog. However, they had no idea. Tonight, everything was different. Puff! A resounding slap. Chu Qianer's cheeks became red and swollen. Moreover, she was sent flying. Why, Chu Qianer, haven't I treated you well enough? Why are you doing this to me? We've been husband and wife for 3 years. Even if it's just on the surface, don't you have any feelings for her? Fang Yu slowly withdrew his hand. The smile on his face was as gentle as ever. But this time, Fang Yu's words were as cold as ice. You dare to hit me? You grassroots kid from a poor province in the lower province, how dare you hit me? Are you trying to rebel? Are you crazy? Chu Qianer's face was filled with disbelief. After she recovered from her shock, she roared furiously. However, bang! Fang Yu appeared beside her again and gave her a slap on the face. Hit you! I still want to kill you today. You planted the love goo in me. You treat me like a dog. 3 years of humiliation. Today, I'll make you, Chu Qianer, and the entire Chu family pay the price. Under the moonlight, Fang Yu smiled coldly. Boom! At this moment, in the depths of King Ye's mansion, old Master Chu and King Yi, the 2 peak martial royal realm experts, turned pale. You're courting death. If we let him continue, I'm afraid my reputation will be ruined. King Yi cursed. Boom. Waves of air surged into the sky. Then, when King Yi appeared again, he was already in front of Fang Yu. He grabbed Fang Yu's neck with both hands, wanting to kill Fang Yu on the spot. Even if we're both peak martial royal realm experts, there are still differences in strength. You're still too inexperienced. When I dominated the Dashuan dynasty, you weren't even born yet. King Yi scolded fiercely. At the same time, old Master Chu also made his move. Good lad. What an ingrate! No matter what, our Chu family has raised you for 3 years. Now you want to tear our Chu family apart because of such a trivial matter. I can't let you live today. Old Master Chu stood in midair and punched Fang Yu's head fiercely. His methods were several times more ruthless than King Ye's. Tonight, the only 2 peak martial royal realm experts in Cloud State City made their move together. Many people let out a sigh. What a pity! Such a genius with a cultivation at the peak of the martial emperor realm is going to die here because he offended the Chu clan and King Yi. Old Master Chu and King Yi. They were peak martial royal realm experts who had become famous many years ago. How could Fang Yu, a young lad in his 20s, defeat them? Even Fang Yu would not be able to face one of them. Moreover, there were 2 of them. 3 years of humiliation, treating me like a pig and a dog without any dignity. They even controlled me with love parasite and tried to order me around like a servant of the Chu family. This is a trivial matter. What a joke. Fang Yu laughed wantonly with a deranged expression. Boom. At that moment, he suddenly took a step forward. Instantly, a terrifying aura swept out like a wolf soaring into the sky. An extremely terrifying aura was emitted. The aura was above that of a peak martial royal realm expert. He was a peak martial ancestor realm expert in the Dashuan dynasty. Take a good look at my cultivation. Peak martial royal realm my ass. I, Fang Yu, am a martial ancestor realm expert. If I wanted to kill you, it would be a piece of cake. Fang Yu laughed coldly. Boom. He pressed down with both palms. In an instant, the weather changed. An incomparably terrifying aura descended on King Yi and Old Master Chu. At that moment, Old Master Chu and King Ye's expressions were filled with extreme fear. How is this possible? A martial ancestor realm expert in his 20s. How can you be so talented? Along with their terrified voices, the bodies of the 2 strongest peak martial emperors of Cloud State City exploded and turned into 2 bloody mists in the sky. Not only was King Yi dead, but Old Master Chu was also stunned. Even the cultivators nearby were shocked by this unbelievable scene. How is this possible? Martial ancestor realm. This useless son-in-law of the Chu family is actually a top expert who looks down on the entire Dashuan dynasty. In the future, he will definitely become a martial venerable. Countless gasps could be heard. However, Fang Yu was indifferent to all this. He walked step by step toward Chu Qianer, who was sitting on the ground with a terrified expression. At that moment, Fang Yu didn't even realize that after he woke up in the mirror world, he had silently lost himself and didn't even know who he was. Chapter 922. Spare me. I know I was wrong. As long as you spare me, I can agree to any condition. Chu Qianer pleaded in fear as she looked at the approaching Fang Yu, who was filled with killing intent. Fang Yu did not have any reaction to this. His expression became colder and colder as he continued to mutter to himself. I have been lonely since I was young. I died at the hands of the so-called righteous cultivators from a small clan. During this period of time when I was cultivating and growing up, I was accompanied by the schemes of my fellow sect members and endless killings. What's ironic is that the 3 years you planted the love goo in Cloud State City were the happiest and most treasured period of my life. A long time ago, I knew that these feelings of love might be fake. With my pride, how could I, Fang Yu, fall in love with such a despicable and venomous woman like you? But I was willing to sink into it. I was unwilling to wake up. But you destroyed all of this. You destroyed all of my yearning for this feeling. As he continued to narrate, Fang Yu's mind became somewhat deranged. His face was filled with madness as he walked towards Chu Qian'er step by step. Let's die together. At this moment, in this mirror world, Fang Yu, who was in Cloud State City, had completely sunk into it. He was no longer like Fang Yu himself. Instead, he was more like the previous generation's extreme god slayer sword master. Just as Fang Yu was about to raise his butcher's knife and die with Chu Qian'er, the system's voice sounded. Beep beep beep. Warning. Severe warning. An unknown emotion is using a special method to infect and assimilate the host. Beginning expulsion, beginning stripping. Boom. As the system finished speaking, Fang Yu finally woke up. His face was filled with shock. He had forcefully broken free from the emotions of the previous generation's god slayer sword master. At this moment, Fang Yu's body was covered in cold sweat. He had sunk into it just like that? He had not sensed anything at all. How was that possible? His memories had clearly awakened in this mirror world. In the end, he didn't even know when he had been influenced by the previous master of the godly slaughter sword. If it weren't for the existence of the system, I'm afraid I would have lost myself and died in the mirror world. Since then, my body has been controlled by the strong will left behind by the previous master of the godly slaughter sword. Thinking of this, Fang Yu became even more furious. Boom. There was no hesitation at all. Fang Yu stepped out with a cold glint in his eyes. He walked to the side of Chu Qian'er, who was sitting paralyzed on the ground with a frozen expression. Let it all end. I've also withstood the second world of reincarnation. Is the god-slaying sword fragment still not going to appear? After that, Fang Yu turned Chu Qian'er into fine powder with a single punch. Boom. It was also at this moment. The world in the mirror shattered into pieces. Only Fang Yu's figure was left in this sky full of fragments, as well as a terrifying weapon that was slowly rising from the endless fragments. This was a spear that radiated an extraordinary divine light. Divine level relic. Frightening dragon spear. Looking at its might, this frightening dragon spear was even more powerful than the scarlet flame divine sword in Fang Yu's hands. What the hell? The god-slaying sword fragment still hasn't appeared? Looking at the frightening dragon spear, Fang Yu frowned and felt that it was a little tricky. This was only the second world of reincarnation, and they were already unable to withstand it. If this continued, he was afraid that he would sink even longer. At that time, the system might not be able to help him. After all, Fang Yu guessed that the white-haired man in the space of the slaughter order was extremely terrifying and could even be the legendary master of the realm of the gods. You're actually still alive? And you haven't been tainted by the will of the mirror world at all. How is this possible? An unconcealable voice of horror slowly appeared behind Fang Yu. In this shattered world of reincarnation, the figure of the first heavenly palace master slowly appeared. He stared at Fang Yu as if he was looking at a terrifying monster. 1,000,000 years ago, before he had built the heavenly palace, at that time, when he first obtained the god-slaying sword fragment, the world of reincarnation in the mirror world was the Cloud State City of the Dexian dynasty. At that time, he had sunk into despair. However, his will was strong and he did not die there. At that time, he had sunk into despair in the world of reincarnation for a total of 30 years. At that time, I was only at the small emperor realm and stepped into this world of reincarnation. Even so, I had sunk into despair in this Cloud State City for 30 years. In this world of reincarnation, I managed to break through to the next realm in less than 3 days. Moreover, the divine level relic that I obtained is far superior to mine. The frightening dragon spear. I'm afraid it's the frightening dragon spear that belonged to the number one god of war in the realm of the gods. While the master of the Heaven Palace was still reeling from the shock. Looking at the dragon's terror spear, Fang Yu took a step forward. He wanted to take this divine-level relic and leave this world of reincarnation. It would be best if he could obtain the god-slaying sword fragment. However, even if he risked his life, he might not be able to obtain it. To Fang Yu, this was not worth it. To Fang Yu, the only thing that made him safe was the super slaughter system. He did not need the god-slaying sword. At least you know your place. If this continues, no matter how many tricks you have up your sleeves, you will not be able to hold on. You have no idea what kind of terrifying existence left behind this world of reincarnation. Seeing this, the Heavenly Palace Master could not help but laugh coldly. However, Fang Yu held the dragon's terror spear tightly. Not only did he not leave the world of reincarnation, but a third world of reincarnation appeared. If I don't pass this world of reincarnation, I won't be able to leave? Fang Yu's face changed. He felt a sharp pain in his arm. The god-slaying imprint shone brightly, as if telling Fang Yu that he only had two choices. He could either take the god-slaying sword fragment and leave this place alive, or he could not take the god-slaying sword fragment and be trapped here forever. Falling into such a state was basically equivalent to death. No. Impossible! You have already given up. Why is the last world of reincarnation still forming? Seeing this, the Heavenly Palace Master's eyes almost popped out of their socket. Then, his face turned ferocious as he roared furiously. Not only that, the Heavenly Palace Master even pounced on Fang Yu in a frenzy. He wanted to stop Fang Yu from entering the third world of reincarnation. The third world of reincarnation was the last world of reincarnation. It was the last will of the terrifying god-slaying sword master. After Fang Yu passed all three worlds of reincarnation, Fang Yu would be the owner of the god-slaying sword fragment. When that time came, his soul would be destroyed. From the moment Fang Yu entered the world of reincarnation, the Heavenly Palace Master did not have any good intentions. He wanted Fang Yu to be trapped in this world of reincarnation. That way, he would be able to rest easy. However, the result was beyond his expectations. He was afraid. Chapter 9:23. In this endless darkness, no matter how much the Master of the Heavenly Palace tried to stop Fang Yu, it was all in vain. At his peak, he was just an ordinary martial god. How could he stop the terrifying will left behind by the god-slaying sword's master? If he could stop it, he wouldn't be a mere martial god. He wouldn't have to rely on the fragments of the god-slaying sword to survive. Damn it! Why is he an exception? Over the past million years, I've used all kinds of methods to lure the successors of the god-slaying sword to come here and kill them all in this world of obsession. None of them have passed the second world. Why did I fail today? The Master of the Heavenly Palace looked like he was about to die. He stood there quietly as he watched the third world of reincarnation gather. At the same time, he was waiting for the moment when his soul would be completely destroyed. The ancient region world. 1,000,000 years is an epoch. In the previous epoch, the ruler of the god realm was the king of godslayers. Now is it you, kid? The Master of the Heavenly Palace laughed bitterly. Unfortunately, he had only been a witness all along. 1,000,000 years ago, when the god realm and the heavenly realm were still in the mortal world, he had witnessed the rise and fall of Godslayer. Now, he was about to witness the rise of a new master of the god realm. He was like a new star that illuminated the darkness. Boom! The fragments gathered. The third world of reincarnation appeared. Who am I? Where am I? What am I doing here? A tall and imposing man slowly opened his eyes on a peerless throne. His eyes were filled with confusion. Soon, memories began to surface in his mind. The master of the God realm finally remembered his identity. He was the master of the God realm, the ruler of the three realms, the strongest person in the ancient region world. God Slayer. He was the master of the God realm, the strongest God king in history. The so-called martial gods were nothing but the lowest specks of dust in front of him. At this level, they didn't even have the qualifications to be his subject. Did I forget something? The man clutched his chest and frowned. Unfortunately, before he could recall anything, a woman's figure appeared outside the towering divine palace. This woman had a noble air about her, and there seemed to be a phoenix circling above her head. On her left and right, there were illusory figures of divine generals in armor following her. She walked towards the man step by step. God Slayer, you've flourished for 30,000 years, and you've been in control of the supreme deity realm for 30,000 years. Now, it's your turn to fall. The woman explained slowly. Behind her, outside the temple, one could vaguely see 9 terrifying gods. They were like bright suns, blooming with endless divine power. Behind the 9 terrifying gods, there were countless soldiers and figures in armor. Most of the figures were martial gods, or even above the martial god realm. However, even so, they were not the main characters outside the temple. They were just cannon fodder that could be turned into corpses at any time. God Slayer, give up your seat. Hand over the divine power seal that represents the master of the deities, and we'll grant you an honorable death. Outside the divine hall, 9 gods that were as terrifying as the bright sun spoke slowly. They resisted the old master of gods through the door of the divine hall. Even though his appearance was extremely young, and he still had a long lifespan, the truth was, the mind of this God-slayer was extremely old after killing countless people in his life. Betrayal! You dare to betray my God-slayer! The man walked down from the throne. He glanced at the gods and the woman wearing a phoenix crown in the lead with a mocking expression. Behind the man, a sword slowly appeared. This sword was ferocious and terrifying. It was scarlet red like blood, and there were 2 large words on it that emitted a monstrous aura. God-slayer. This sword is called God-slayer, it's my origin sword. It's also the divine power seal that represents the master of the deities as you mentioned. How bold of you! Come and take it from me. A battle had begun. The sun was setting in the deity world, and the sky was filled with the glow of dusk. The man wielded the sword and slaughtered the entire deity world, from the 9 strongest gods to the lowly martial gods. Not a single one was left alive. The entire deity world was devoid of life. Very good. I, God-slayer, will be buried with the entire deity world. Very good. This man, who had committed monstrous massacres and ascended from the most ordinary lower province of the human world to the supreme master of the deity world, closed his eyes in front of the shattered temple. Behind him, the divine power seal and the God-slayer sword madly soared into the sky. It carried all the murderous aura that the man had accumulated throughout his life as it flew toward the human world. The God-slayer sword buzzed. The terrifying sword chime gave others an incomparably eerie feeling. Once people heard about it, they would want to go and kill. At this moment, the world in the mirror gradually turned illusory. A dark red sword blade fragment floated in the air and floated in the air. Is this the final scene of the God-slayer sword's master's death? Before this, in order to protect the deity world and the ancient region, he fought a terrifying demon that wanted to descend here. He was severely injured. After returning to the deity world, he was betrayed. All of his subordinates, including the God Empress, targeted him. They wanted to force him to hand over the divine power seal that represented the authority of the deity world. Fang Yu sighed as he looked at the black-haired God-slayer, who had passed away in the temple. The slaughter order of the 10 directions. the white-haired man in the mysterious space, looked almost exactly the same as the Godslayer. However, the Godslayer who had died here seemed to have shed all of his murderous aura. He seemed like an ordinary person of the mortal world, within the space of the slaughter order. The white-haired man was filled with murderous aura and terrifying murderous intent. He was a Godslayer. This was beyond Fang Yu's expectations. There was no blood at all. There was no danger at all. Fang Yu stepped into the world of the third mirror. It was as if he had just gone through the motions. Within the Godslayer's body, he had witnessed the final scene of the deity world. It's time to go back. Fang Yu stretched out his hand. Before he could grab the Godslayer sword fragment, on his arm, the Godslayer imprint shone brightly and transformed into a giant mouth that swallowed the Godslayer sword fragment in one gulp. Then, the last part of the world of obsession was completely shattered. When Fang Yu opened his eyes again, he was already in the Heavenly Palace's Hall of Inheritance. Chapter 924. The Ancestral Land of the Heavenly Palace. What did this mean? Old Gui Xian was very clear about this. The previous sect masters of the Heavenly Palace had completed their ascension and succession of authority there. In other words, this kid in front of him knew how to inherit the authority in the Heavenly Palace key and wanted to go to the ancestral land of the Heavenly Palace to become the new sect master of the Heavenly Palace. Damn it! This kid is just a foreign cultivator. He's not even a creature of the ancient region. How did he know how to inherit the authority of the sect master of the Heavenly Palace? Even 100,000 years ago, in the heyday of the Heavenly Palace, there were less than 10 people who knew the method of the sect master of the Heavenly Palace. Old Gui Xian gritted his teeth in hatred. He could not wait to find the guy who leaked the secret method of the sect master of the Heavenly Palace and kill him. When old Gui Xian found out that the guy he wanted to kill was actually the first sect master of the Heavenly Palace, how would he feel? Don't tell me you don't know. Fang Yu walked over slowly with a hint of threat in his voice. In his hand, cards slowly appeared one by one, ready to be released. Fang Yu still had one more card, the Tianming Martial God 5 seconds card. Although it was a bit of a waste to use it on old Gui Xian. However, old Gui Xian had not gone far. A card from a black iron treasure chest in exchange for a silver treasure chest was still a profit for Fang Yu. I wonder how powerful the Tianming Martial God 5 seconds card is? Fang Yu muttered to himself. However, at this moment, when Fang Yu took out the card, old Gui Xian's nerves were already extremely tense. Because in his perception, Fang Yu's aura of death had risen to the extreme. It was almost comparable to when Martial Emperor Qi Zhao's original body descended. How is this possible? This kid is just a cultivator from the lower realm. At most, he's at the level of a 7-star great saint. How could he give me such a terrifying aura of death? In front of the aura of death, Gui Xian was quickly terrified. I know. Please follow me. When Gui Xian spoke, he instinctively wanted to show a humble and flattering expression. However, he was old and proud as the leader of the Heavenly Palace tribe, so he couldn't do that. Therefore, when he said these words, Xian Gui's face turned red and his face stiffened. Very soon, the two of them left the Sky Palace Inheritance Hall and arrived in the Red Wilderness once again. However, this time, the first master of the Heavenly Palace was no longer causing trouble. What appeared before Fang Yu was the true battlefield of the martial gods. The setting sun was as red as blood. The crimson sky and crimson earth. On the towering and barren mountains and mountain ranges, one could vaguely see the ruins of buildings. Around the ruins, one could also see the figures of great saints bustling about. It was the figure of the great saint of the Heaven Palace tribe. It was the figure of a saint-stage fierce beast. As far as the eye could see, there were many figures fighting to the death over an ancient treasure. 100,000 years ago, the battle had destroyed this land. Even after 100,000 years, not the slightest bit of vegetation could be seen growing in this area. The battlefield of the martial gods. 100,000 years ago, it was a place in the northern part of the Xianfeng domain. Originally, this internal battle had little to do with the heavenly palace. However, since the two strongest martial gods are fighting in person, the rest of the martial monarchs have less to worry about. At that time, there was even a lunatic who had lost his mind and summoned the entire mountain to kill the experts of the other party's faction. 100,000 years ago, the mountain of the heavenly palace was a mountain that was almost refined into a magic treasure. The mountain of the heavenly palace exploded in the battle, forming a small broken space attached to the battlefield of the martial gods. Speaking of this, Gui Xian's voice was a little sad. The cultivators of the heavenly palace fought to such an extent that even the mountain of the heavenly palace was used to kill the enemy. One could imagine how terrifying the internal battle was back then. Even if the battle between the martial gods had not happened, the heavenly palace would have split into two sooner or later. The heavenly palace, the ruler of the heavenly palace, had disappeared from the 9 realms of the human realm. How ironic! They did not die at the hands of the enemy, but died because of their internal battle. So where is the ancestral land? Fang Yu did not want to hear any sighs. He and Gui Xian had circled around the Crimson Wasteland, but they still had not reached the ancestral land of the heavenly palace. Fang Yu had just finished speaking. On the other side, Xian Gui stopped. This place was a lake. The only lake in the entire battlefield of the martial gods. A few great saints had stopped here to explore the mystery of the lake and see if there were any treasures of the heavenly palace from 100,000 years ago. But when they saw Fang Yu, without exception, all of their expressions changed drastically, and they frantically fled outside. These great saints had witnessed how terrifying Fang Yu was outside the entrance of the battlefield of the martial gods. He fought with the Archfiend Heavenly Venerate alone, and no matter how the Archfiend Heavenly Venerate attacked, he was not injured at all. At that time they saw it clearly. The Archfiend Heavenly Venerate was at least equivalent to a peak 3-star emperor, or even a 4-star emperor. He was even stronger than Palace Master Ghost. However, even so, he was still wiped out by Fang Yu's move in the end, not even leaving behind ashes. Such a terrifying level. 5-star emperor? 7-star emperor? Or a legendary martial god from the lower realm. Although it was impossible for a martial god to be born in the lower realm, they dared to believe that Fang Yu, a cultivator from the lower realm, was actually the sole fragment of a martial god from the lower realm, Fang Yu. The reason being that Fang Yu's performance along the way was simply too terrifying. He was almost beyond the level of the 3 divine powers. The ancestral land is under this lake. Gui Xian stopped and said heavily. At the same time, he was afraid that Fang Yu would not believe him, so he deliberately added a few words. There are not many treasures in the ruins of the battlefield of the martial gods in the Crimson Wilderness. The real treasures can create a small space on their own and hide in it. There are several divine treasures sealed in the ancestral land. They have the miraculous effect of changing the world and opening up a small world. The ancestral land is under this lake. At least when the Heaven Palace was established 100,000 years ago, the ancestral land existed under the lake of the Heaven Palace. If you don't believe me, you can use the Heaven Palace key and try to sense it. The power sealed in the Heavenly Palace key is somehow connected to the ancestral land. Fang Yu was skeptical. He opened the system interface and did not find any slaughter treasure chests on Gui Xian's body. Then, he took out the Heaven Palace key. As expected, the key to the Heavenly Palace trembled as if it wanted to fly into the lake. It seemed that Gui Xian was still cooperative and what he said was true. Chapter 925. If you still don't believe me, I can go with you to the ancestral land under the lake. But I'm afraid that if I go with you, you'll think that I'm plotting for the authority of the celestial palace and waiting for an opportunity to seize it." Old Gui Xian leaned on his peachwood staff and said calmly. Near the lake, as Fang Yu came to a stop, numerous great saint experts in the Crimson Wilderness were drawn over as well. However, they didn't dare to get too close and could only watch from afar. After all, during this period of time, in the Crimson Wilderness, they had searched almost all the celestial palace ruins. There were indeed some good things, but they were too inferior compared to the title of the overlord of the celestial palace. Moreover, there weren't many good things. Many great saints were still empty-handed in the martial god battlefield. They hadn't obtained anything yet. Fang Yu was recognized by all the great saints as the strongest. He first killed the 5-star great saint, His Highness Ghost Yun Feng. Then, he attacked the origin spirit pearl that sealed the Emperor's attack. They heard that he even killed an evil demon that was comparable to a peak 3-star emperor outside the martial god battlefield. All these achievements let everyone know that Fang Yu was extraordinary. At the same time, they also believed that Fang Yu was here for a great purpose. He definitely wasn't here for the Emperor-grade weapon or the Emperor-grade treasure. This didn't fit Fang Yu's style as an expert with the combat strength of an emperor. Little did they know, Fang Yu wasn't a terrifying expert, and he didn't have the combat strength of an emperor. In the beginning, Fang Yu wanted to set foot in the Lingyun realm because he was forced into a corner by His Highness Ghost Yun Feng, a terrifying great saint. That was why he wanted to escape here and hide his tracks. In order to protect himself, Fang Yu had used some of the methods he had obtained from the slaughter treasure chest. In the end, he was recognized as a terrifying expert, an existence comparable to the Emperor realm. There were even people who thought that Fang Yu was a split soul of the martial god from the lower realm, and that he had come to the Lingyun Mystery Land specifically for the 7 god-level relics of the Celestial Palace that had never appeared. If Fang Yu knew about this, he would definitely not know whether to laugh or cry. He was very weak, okay? In the martial god battlefield, he was probably the only peak Grand Venerable. The others were all great saints. Moreover, a few more 7-star great saints had appeared. Saint Fang has stopped. Could it be that the only lake in the Crimson Wasteland actually has traces of the 7 god-level treasures? 100,000 years ago, the Heavenly Palace was the true number 1 martial god's force. Even the underworld, which also has a supreme martial god, can't catch up to the Heavenly Palace's position of number 1 overlord. The Heavenly Palace has been destroyed. However, the 7 god-level treasures had all disappeared along with the fall of the 2 martial gods. Martial God Battlefield. These god-level rare treasures must be in the martial god battlefield. Saint Fang must be here for them. The great saints near the lake discussed fervently. Bang! Behind the many great saints, a figure slowly emerged. No. Or rather, this figure had actually been hiding near the lake all this time. The person was none other than the soul-refining demon emperor, who was the first to set foot on the martial god battlefield, and sacrificed 30,000 cultivators of the 3 tribes of the Heavenly Palace to activate the martial god battlefield. That brat Fang Yu, he is merely an ant martial saint. What a bullsh**t martial god's split soul. What a joke. This brat has some tricks up his sleeves. He can actually make these great saints run around in circles. Among the people present, only the soul-refining demon emperor knew Fang Yu's background. After all, they had all come from the lower realm to the ancient realm. The soul-refining demon emperor knew Fang Yu's background very well. However, the soul-refining demon emperor did not know that Fang Yu was no longer the Fang Yu of the past. He had many special cards, the god-slaying sword fragment, and the Heavenly Palace key. In the martial god battlefield, Fang Yu could be said to be like a fish in water. Even if the soul-refining demon emperor wanted to deal with Fang Yu, he would have to see if he could defeat Fang Yu. Wait here. After I go down and inherit the power of the ancestral land, I'll find a way to remove the curse in your bodies. I'll let you return to the ancient realm. After Fang Yu learned about the method to enter the small space under the lake from Gui Xian, he immediately said in a deep voice, "After all, after inheriting the power of the heavenly palace, these people of the heavenly palace would have to listen to Fang Yu's orders. When the time came, how could Fang Yu allow such elite combat strength to be covered in dust? Let's talk about it when you come back alive." Gui Xian put on a fake smile as he cursed in his heart. In his opinion, the power of the heavenly palace should be inherited by the people of the heavenly palace. Fang Yu was just an outsider who did not even have the bloodline of the heavenly palace's ancestors. How could he steal the power of the sect master? He was simply despicable. Along the way, Gui Xian was telling the truth. However, he hid a lot of things. In the space under the lake, there was a path that had to be taken to reach the ancestral land. 100,000 years ago, it was called the sect master's trial path. Fang Yu had never cultivated the heavenly palace's legacy cultivation technique. When the time came, he would be seen as an outsider on the path. At that time, the difficulty of the trial path would rise to a terrifying level. No matter how strong Fang Yu was, he would not be able to complete the trial path alive. "You will definitely die on this trip. And this path of training can only be taken by one person. Even if you ask me to accompany you, it's impossible, because I don't have the sect master's key. It's a pity." After 100,000 years, the sect master's key has finally appeared in front of us. It will be lost in the trial path, and we will never be able to get it back. Gui Xian sighed in his heart. Without the sect master's key, it was possible to force one's way through the trial path. However, one would need to be at least a martial god to do so. "I'm going in." Fang Yu stepped into the lake. At the same time, there was another person who quietly sank into the lake. That person was the soul-refining demon emperor. Ha! The ancient book recorded it clearly. Those who have the heavenly palace's key will set foot on the sect master's trial path. Those who only have ordinary ancestor-grade jade bones, like me, will go directly to the ancestral land to participate in the trial of the 7 god-grade treasures. The soul-refining demon emperor was extremely excited. That was a god-grade treasure. It was an opportunity to become a martial god. As long as he obtained a god-grade unique treasure, even if he could not become a martial god, he would be able to fight against a martial god with his peak martial emperor cultivation in the ancient domain world. Fang Yu and the soul-refining demon emperor had both disappeared. At this moment, Ku Xian was finally willing to show himself. Beside him were 2 great saints, Chu He and Chu Lai. In the hands of the 3 of them, there were 3 shining bone jades of different colors. They were ancestor-grade jade bones like the soul-refining demon emperor. Chapter 926. According to the Xian Gui, after Fang Yu had set foot in the lake, he had used the palace master key to search for the rift of the heaven palace's ancestral ground and entered it with brute force. The world was spinning. The stars were moving. Fang Yu's vision darkened as a terrifying pressure struck him. Now that he had set foot in the Heaven Palace's ancestral ground, it felt like he had just arrived at the ancient realm from the lower realm. Previously, in order to adapt to the high-quality qi of the ancient realm, Fang Yu's mind had been greatly affected. He had only recovered after his cultivation had been converted to the martial highness realm. At this moment, Fang Yu had the same feeling in the Heaven Palace's ancestral ground. Such a rich qi of the heavens and earth. So this is the ancestral ground of the strongest martial god realm faction 100,000 years ago? Cultivating here for a day is equivalent to cultivating for 100 days in the 9 realms, or 10 years in the lower realm. In other words, if a cultivator from the lower realm was able to cultivate here, he would be able to achieve the peak martial grandmaster realm in a day, and achieve the martial emperor realm in 10 days. Fang Yu finally understood why the Heaven Palace was able to hold the position of the strongest faction for so long. The strength of the Heaven Palace was indeed immeasurable. The ancestral land of the Heavenly Palace in front of him was clearly green and full of life compared to the martial god's battlefield, which was covered in a crimson wilderness and devoid of life. The aura of the woods and herbs could be felt. Regardless of how lively the place was, it was still eerily silent. There were no cries of insects or beasts, resulting in an eerie silence. Under Fang Yu's feet was a long path leading to the end of the mountain range. At the end of the mountain range, he could vaguely see a bright sun and a cold moon floating in the sky. The appearance of the sun and the cold moon was exactly the same as the Lingyun heavens and earth. The sun and the moon in the sky. This is the real secret treasure of the martial gods. Even though there is no succession, it still contains the auras of the 2 strongest martial god. Heaven Highness Martial God. Martial God Xiantian. These 2 are sleeping in the sun and the moon at the end of the mountain range. Upon having this thought, Fang Yu's breathing intensified. The 2 broken martial god masks that could summon the true souls of the martial gods were vibrating vigorously as if they were being attracted by something. At this moment, if it wasn't for Fang Yu suppressing them with his cultivation, the 2 masks would have flown into the sky and disappeared into the sun and moon. Originally, Fang Yu had planned to head to other places on the battlefield of the martial gods after inheriting the authority of the Heavenly Palace. He wanted to search for the places where the 2 martial gods were slumbering. Unexpectedly, he didn't even need to deliberately look for it. He actually encountered it in the ancestral land of the Heavenly Palace. On the battlefield of the martial gods, where else could be more suitable for the 2 supreme martial gods to hibernate than the ancestral land of the Heavenly Palace, which had extremely high-quality spiritual energy. This path won't be easy, but it doesn't matter. It's time to use this card. After saying that, Fang Yu stepped into the path. In Fang Yu's hand, a special card with a star pattern engraved on it floated up. This meant that martial god Tianming had 5 breaths' time to arrive. Bang! The star emitted a brilliant glow as it merged with Fang Yu's body. A powerful aura burst out from Fang Yu's body, which only belonged to the martial god realm. 5 breaths' time, even though it's not a lot, it's still the martial god realm. It should be enough for me to go through this dangerous path. Fang Yu's figure was as fast as a ray of light as he traversed through the mountain path. It was also at this moment that the terrifying monsters that were hibernating in this mountain range woke up. The aura of a living person. Such fresh flesh. It's been almost 1,000,000 years since we last smelled such fresh flesh. He doesn't have the aura of a cultivator of the Heavenly Palace. No wonder the spirit-trapping chains let us out. Muffled roars resounded throughout the mountain range. The sky that was initially covered in dark clouds rapidly changed at that instant. Even the bright sun and the cold moon were shrouded by the clouds. Billowing black clouds gathered, bringing with them an evil aura. Numerous illusory soul shadows that were tens of thousands of feet tall appeared, emitting cold gazes. Each of the illusionary figures was over 10,000 zhang tall. Their bodies were in between the real world and the illusionary world. Each of their actions had a faint aura of the martial god realm. The aura of the martial god realm? Fang Yu was startled. Meanwhile, he was relieved that he had used his strongest trump card as soon as he had sensed the danger. Let martial god Tianming descend upon him. Even though Fang Yu did not know the details of the old man's plan, he could roughly guess it. As the leader of one of the 3 tribes of the Heavenly Palace remnants, how could Gui Xian allow an outsider to control the Heavenly Palace? Knowing Gui Xian's personality, it was most likely that the Heavenly Palace ancestral land was in great danger, a danger that could easily kill Fang Yu. However, Fang Yu did not expect the danger in the Heavenly Palace ancestral land to be this terrifying. 17 martial gods. So many of them. The god spirits of 17 martial gods. Guarding the Heavenly Palace ancestral land, guarding the path of the trial. The strength of the Heavenly Palace was indeed terrifying. It was obvious that the 17 martial god spirits were not from the Heavenly Palace. They were the martial gods that the Heavenly Palace had accumulated over the past 900,000 years, who had died at the hands of the martial god realm experts of the Heavenly Palace. Even after their deaths, they did not have any peace. They were treated as evil beings and refined as the cornerstones of the Heavenly Palace ancestral land. He. Martial god realm? No, he only has the aura of the martial god realm. I'm afraid he's using some kind of god realm artifact. Interesting. Unfortunately, you alone are not enough to fill the gaps between our teeth. Otherwise, we would have a great meal today. Inside the Heavenly Palace ancestral land, the figures of the Heavenly Palace ancestral land were laughing hideously. Their eyes were filled with disdain when they glanced at Fang Yu, a mere ant. He was just a guy who had used an artifact to show off. The kid was surely going to die today. Right at this moment, Fang Yu made his move. His figure was as quick as a ray of light. He pierced through the sky filled with demonic black chi and charged at the martial god true souls in the area. 5 breaths time. Fang Yu could not afford to waste any time. If he did not utilize the power of martial god Tianming to eliminate the martial god's true souls within 5 breaths time, Fang Yu would be the next one to die. Ha! Are we hallucinating? This kid is just an ant-like cultivator. Instead of running away, he actually dares to take the initiative to attack us? He's asking for it. Let me attack first. I'll shatter the kid's soul, then we can all enjoy the delicious meal that has delivered itself to us. The martial god's true souls burst out laughing. Their eyes were filled with disdain as they stared at Fang Yu, who was charging at them. Chapter 9:27. Apart from Fang Yu's figure, an illusory old man slowly walked out of the inheritance hall in this side of the celestial palace. It was the first master of the Heavenly Palace. How is this possible? Although I knew you had a high chance of passing the third world, how could you be so fast? You didn't even use a day. Even the master of the Heavenly Palace, who was a minor emperor, had been trapped in the second world for 30 years. However, Fang Yu had managed to walk out of the third world, which was even more terrifying, in less than 15 minutes. This was too shocking for the master of the Heavenly Palace. Could it be that you're not an ordinary person, and you're not the inheritor of the Godly Slayer sword? You're the reincarnation of God Slayer? The master of the Heavenly Palace looked at Fang Yu in shock. He was speechless. Obviously, he had misunderstood something. He even thought that Fang Yu was the reincarnation of the Godly Slayer sword's owner. Otherwise, how could Fang Yu have passed through 3 worlds in such a short time and obtained the Godly Slayer sword's fragment? However, the actual situation, only Fang Yu knew the truth. If the first master of the Heavenly Palace who had passed through the world of Cloud State City also had the Godly Slayer mark, he would have been able to pass through the last world easily. This was because the last world of obsession was not difficult at all. In Fang Yu's opinion, it was just a formality. Fang Yu thought so. However, Fang Yu did not know that the reason why he had been able to pass through the third world so easily was because he was not affected by the Godly Slayer sword. It was because he had triggered the system's protection mechanism. Under the system's protection mechanism, even the terrifying Godslayer's Godly Slayer sword could not affect Fang Yu at all. If it had been the master of the Heavenly Palace who had passed through the third world, he would have died with the Godslayer in the last scene. In other words, the reason why Fang Yu had been able to pass through the third world was because of the system's protection mechanism. Otherwise, under normal circumstances, even martial gods would not be able to leave the final world. It's true that heroes come from the youth since ancient times. I'm impressed. The first master of the heavenly palace laughed bitterly. The illusory body of the soul spirit gradually turned transparent at this moment and also gradually dissipated. Fang Yu had taken the god-slaying sword fragment. In the past 100 years, not many gods above the true martial god realm could survive such a long period of time. The reason why his soul had been able to survive for 1,000,000 years was because of the god-slaying sword fragment. Without the god-slayer sword fragment, he was nothing. The first master of the heavenly palace was finally going to fall. I'm close to death, so I don't have anything to give you. Why don't I tell you how to inherit the sect master's authority in the Sky Palace Key? In the future, if there is a chance, the heavenly palace may be revitalized in your hands and regain its glory. The first lord of the heavenly palace kept muttering to himself. As he muttered, lines of mantras, chants, and a place were all imprinted into Fang Yu's mind. The ancestral land of the heavenly palace? As long as you refine the heavenly palace key in the ancestral land of the heavenly palace, you will be able to inherit the authority of the heavenly palace. At that time, all the cultivators of the heavenly palace who use the heavenly palace's cultivation techniques as their foundation will have to listen to the orders of the sect master. Fang Yu said slowly. He felt good about it. If he could inherit the authority of the heavenly palace, not to mention the 2 ultimate martial gods, just the 3 tribes of the heavenly palace would be an extremely powerful force. Of course, just like the 57 Sage Realm beasts, this was based on the premise that they could break free from the curse and leave the Lingyun realm. Otherwise, there would be no difference between having them and not having them. Buzz. A ripple appeared in the inheritance hall of the heavenly palace. 2 figures walked out of the ripple one after another. Following them were 2 auras of weapons. Both of them were Emperor-grade weapons. One was a terrifying giant saber surrounded by a murderous aura. The other was a long sword surrounded by a sharp cold light. Obviously, this was the reward for passing the mirror world. The 2 figures who walked out were also old acquaintances of Fang Yu. One was old monster Ku Xian and the other was old monster Gui Xian. The 2 of them were lucky. Or else, a little later, the fragment of the Godslayer sword had been completely refined by Fang Yu. They had passed the mirror world and wanted to go out. Without Fang Yu's permission, it was impossible. Seeing the 2 of them come out, Fang Yu deliberately sensed it. In the illusory world of the Godslayer sword fragment, the other 2 great saints had already sunk into it. They had become walking corpses and their souls had already dispersed. These 2 old fellows still have some ability. 2 Emperor-grade weapons. They have gained a lot. Fang Yu muttered and could not help but look at the giant saber and the long sword. It was these 2 eyes that made the 2 old monsters, Ku Xian and Gui Xian, fearful. They took a step back and looked at Fang Yu deeply, their eyes full of surprise. In the reincarnation mirror, that terrifying world of deduction, the obsession inside, how terrifying was it? They were very clear. Relying on the 2 of them to help and remind each other, they finally woke up from the mirror world and went through a lot of hardships to find a way to break the mirror world. In the end, they found that Fang Yu came out earlier than them. This was simply unbelievable. However, it seemed that Fang Yu did not receive the inheritance reward. Could it be that when he came out, he did not bring it with him? Seeing Fang Yu looking at the divine weapons in their hands, they suddenly became nervous. One had to know. Previously, Fang Yu had taken the origin spirit pearl that sealed an emperor's attack and was still alive and well. If Fang Yu wanted to snatch it, they might not be able to keep it. Don't worry. I won't snatch it from you. Just these 2 pieces of junk, I don't care about them at all. Seeing the two of them so nervous, Fang Yu suddenly sneered. To this, the two of them did not believe him at all. They did not know that Fang Yu was telling the truth. In the mirror world, the Dragon Terror Spear, a divine weapon that was one grade higher than the Red Fire Divine Sword, Fang Yu did not pay much attention to it, let alone two Emperor weapons. When he passed the first mirror world, Fang Yu had already fiddled with Emperor weapons. If you have something to say it quickly. If you don't say it, the two of us will leave. Old Monster Gui Xian looked at Fang Yu and said coldly. As for the side, Ku Xian did not even look at Fang Yu. He directly turned in the direction behind him and used his means to leave the Inheritance Palace. You remnants of the Heavenly Palace are very familiar with the Battle God battlefield. I wonder where the ancestral land of the Heavenly Palace is, Fang Yu said slowly. When he heard this name, Old Monster Gui Xian's face changed. He looked at Fang Yu with a face full of anger. At this moment, Old Monster Gui Xian even regretted not following Ku Xian and ignoring Fang Yu. Chapter 928. The souls of the martial gods guarding the ancestral grounds did not treat Fang Yu seriously. However, they had no idea how powerful Fang Yu's martial god realm force was. It was the third-ranked martial god of the Heaven Palace, who was on par with the two strongest martial gods of the Heaven Palace 100,000 years ago. In the ancient realm 100,000 years ago, it was common knowledge that the martial gods and ordinary martial gods were two different realms. Even a peak 9-star martial god was still just a weak child in front of the holder of the title of Supreme Martial God. In other words, 100,000 years ago, apart from the experts of the Heaven Realm, the three strongest martial gods were undoubtedly the deities of the human world. Even though Fang Yu had only borrowed a slight amount of martial god Tianming's force, it was more than enough to defeat the true souls of the martial gods who had been decaying for 1,000,000 years. Everyone, take a look at my fist! Fang Yu let out a roar. In the blink of an eye, he arrived in front of the martial god closest to him. Fang Yu's martial god force surged and gathered in his fist. The martial god realm soul facing the punch was none other than the one who had boasted that he would shatter Fang Yu's soul and feast on his flesh and blood. Ha ha ha! 700,000 years ago, my name was Martial God Xuesha. I was a peak 3-star martial god. I'm not far from the 4-star martial god realm. You little kid, how dare you treat me like a pushover? How ridiculous! Come with me and face your death. The martial god Xuesha reached out his hand with a hideous grin and slapped at Fang Yu. It was as if he was trying to smash Fang Yu's flesh and soul into pieces. At this moment, if it were anyone else present, even a peak martial monarch realm expert would be scared witless by the martial god's gaze. Unfortunately, the martial god Xuesha was facing Fang Yu. The one who should be scared witless should be him, the martial god of bloody slaughter. Such an arrogant tone! Let's see who's stronger. Fang Yu sneered inwardly. His fist whistled even louder as it collided with martial god Xuesha's 300-meter-tall palm. On the side, many martial god realm martial gods were watching with cold grins. Their faces were filled with disdain as they mocked Fang Yu for overestimating himself. How ridiculous! He doesn't even have the cultivation of the martial god realm. So what if he has a secret treasure that grants him the power of the martial god realm? How can a child wield a hammer? This kid is simply laughable to the extreme. Fang Yu's fist and martial god Xuesha's giant palm finally collided. Bang! It was a collision of martial god's force. The entire sky and earth of the Heavenly Palace ancestral land seemed to tremble a little at this moment, but it was only a slight tremor. A terrifying forces battle. Something inconceivable happened. Fang Yu's fist easily shattered martial god Xuesha's huge palm and continued to move towards martial god Xuesha's body. It was as if Fang Yu was the real martial god, while martial god Xuesha, who was relying on the secret treasure Qing Wei, was a clown who could not withstand a single blow. How is this possible? That's impossible. Although martial god Xuesha endured for 700,000 years as a soul, he was a peak 3-star martial god at his peak. In the ancient domain, a peak 3-star martial god is considered to be one of the more powerful martial gods. How could martial god Xuesha be so weak? Even if it's just a soul, it shouldn't be like that. The spirits of the martial gods were astounded after witnessing the scene. Some of them could not help but charge at Fang Yu. Over the years, they had encountered many experts who had trespassed into the ancestral land of the Heavenly Palace. However, it was their first time encountering someone as troublesome as Fang Yu. Nice one, kid. Even martial god Xuesha is no match for you. I, martial god Xianqing, shall teach you a lesson today. Let's see what you've got. Another martial god's spirit charged at Fang Yu. It turned into a giant black sword slashing at him. Perhaps martial god Xuesha had endured for too long. His soul was no longer sturdy, which was why it had ended up like that. However, this martial god Xianqing was a young martial god who had his flesh destroyed by two powerful martial gods 100,000 years ago, thus he was imprisoned here. Martial god Xianqing had only been here for 100,000 years. His soul was still at its peak. Besides, martial god Xuanqing's cultivation was a lot stronger than martial god Xuesha's when he was at his peak. He was a 7-star martial god. Otherwise, how could he be qualified for a martial god of the Heavenly Palace to personally destroy his body and imprison his soul? Martial god Xianqing. He's making his move. He's the only one among the 17 martial god spirits that is still in their peak condition. He's a terrifying guy who still has some of his strength. In other words, even if all 16 martial god spirits fought him together, we still might not stand a chance against martial god Xianqing. The martial god spirits were relieved when they saw martial god Xianqing making his move. They immediately wore disdainful looks. Even if martial god Xuanqing's flesh had been destroyed and only his soul was left, he could still sweep across a zone on his own. Even the weakest martial god dominator faction would be in danger of being wiped out if they were matched up against martial god Xuanqing's spirit. Among the 17 martial god spirits, martial god Xianqing was the strongest. Great one. If that's the case, I won't hold back either. Let's end this quickly. You're trying to kill me with your giant sword. Then I'll give you a sword strike in return. Let's see how powerful my sword is. Fang Yu did not back away when he saw martial god Xianqing and the giant sword above his head. A terrifying illusionary longsword appeared in his hand. It was made of martial god Tianming's god force. With the longsword in hand, Fang Yu took a step forward and slashed at the incoming Xianqing martial god's soul sword. How ridiculous! I'm a 7-star martial god. Judging from your weak martial god force, the martial god that's trying to borrow your power is at most a 5-star martial god. You're trying to slash my giant sword made of the purest soul force with a longsword made of the 5-star martial god's force? You little doll, you're really funny. Martial god Xianqing chuckled. His face was filled with a sense of superiority, as if he had already trampled Fang Yu under his feet. Chapter 929. However, he had no idea. The martial god force in Fang Yu's body was weak not because he was borrowing the martial god's power from a weak martial god. It was because the martial god was too strong. Fang Yu's flesh could not withstand the martial god's power. It could only withstand a little bit of it. If the strongest martial god could be called a weak martial god, then there was no martial god in the 9 domains that could be called a martial god. Fang Yu snapped furiously as he slashed forward with his sword. Crack! A cracking sound could be heard. Under the astounded gazes of the martial gods, the god force longsword in Fang Yu's hand penetrated the giant's sword with ease. The huge soul power sword shattered and exploded, filling the sky with fragments. Meanwhile, martial god Xuanqing's figure began to tremble. His figure turned blurry too. It was obvious that he was severely injured. How is this possible? That's martial god Xuanqing. Among the 17 martial gods, he's the one with the most complete strength. Why is it that even a peak 7-star martial god was defeated by this ant brat? Who exactly is this kid? No. What you should be asking is, what level is the martial god who lent his divine power to this kid? A series of terrified voices appeared. The 17 martial gods who were trying to show off their strength and kill Fang Yu to feast on his flesh were stunned. They could not say a second word. The reason for that was because there were martial gods among them who had experienced the eras of the 3 strongest martial gods. They had already noticed something. No. Impossible. Tianming. It's the aura of martial god Tianming's martial god force. But how is this possible? With martial god Tianming's arrogance, why would he lend his god force to an ant with the aura of the lower realm? A martial god screamed in fear. Martial god Tianming? The name sounded familiar. Buzz. At that instant, the martial gods stared at Fang Yu with their eyes open wide. Their eyes were filled with terror and disbelief. They finally remembered that martial god Tianming was a martial god. One of the 3 strongest martial gods. Ranked 3rd. 100,000 years ago, the lord of the underworld, the martial god of destiny who claimed lives from the heavens and was immortal through reincarnation. The scene fell silent. The 17 martial god realm souls no longer had their previous arrogance. They stared at Fang Yu in fear. Their figures kept backing away as if Fang Yu was a terrifying existence that they could not afford to offend. In fact, if it was possible, the guardians of the 17 celestial palaces' trial paths also wanted to return to the dark sealed cage. It was better to suffer in the cage than to face this brat who was related to martial god Tianming. 3 supreme martial gods. He was not someone ordinary martial gods like them could provoke. Even the title alone was enough to intimidate them. Even if they were in their peak condition, they would run as far as they could if they knew Fang Yu was able to borrow the martial god force of martial god Tianming, let alone their souls. 3 breaths had passed. Fang Yu began to panic. After all, the martial god Tianming's martial god force only lasted for 5 breaths. More than half of the time had passed, yet he still managed to kill a martial god realm soul. After 5 breaths of time, wouldn't he be done for? Let your soul scatter. Fang Yu charged forward. He swung the giant sword made of divine force at martial god Xuanqing and martial god Xuesha. Martial god Xuanqing and martial god Xuesha, 2 reputable martial gods in their respective eras, immediately fled for their lives under Fang Yu's sword. They did not dare to attack Fang Yu. They did not dare to let Fang Yu's divine force slash at them either. Otherwise, their souls would really perish. Spare us. We won't do it again. You should have told us about your relationship with senior martial god Tianming. Why would we dare to stop you if you told us? Stop fighting, we surrender. Terrified voices rang out one after another. In addition to martial god Xuanqing and martial god Xuesha, the rest of the martial gods reacted the same way. They kept begging for their lives like quails in front of martial god Tianming's name. Fang Yu was startled by the sight. This was a little different from what he had imagined. As the guardians of the ancestral land of Heaven Palace, shouldn't these martial god realm souls fight him to the death? Why were they begging for their lives all of a sudden? Besides, each of you was a martial god at your peak. Was it appropriate for them to beg for their lives in front of Fang Yu, a mere junior? I'm going to the ancestral land of Heaven Palace to inherit the authority of the Patriarch of Heaven Palace. Aren't you going to stop me as the guardians? Fang Yu pointed at himself and asked the martial god's souls in disbelief. He was holding a sword made of divine power in one hand. The martial god realm's souls that were initially blocking the path of the trial were kicked flying by the other martial god. At this moment, the path of the trial was unimpeded. There were no longer any obstacles blocking his way. Besides, the 17 guardians of the martial god realm souls lined up on both sides of the path with fawning looks on their faces. The only thing missing was the words "Please go ahead" written all over their faces. Is it that simple? Fang Yu rubbed his chin. He glanced at the 17 guardians in front of him who were trembling in fear. He quickly made his way through the path like a ray of light. At this moment, the 5 breaths' time had finally run out. Fang Yu could not afford to waste any more time. After all, he had lost the chance to compete with the martial god realm souls. If any of the 17 guardians tried to kill Fang Yu, he would most likely die here. The martial god realm, it was the martial god realm after all. Even though it was only a soul, it still had the means to suppress a peak martial monarch realm expert with ease. Besides, Fang Yu was only a peak martial highness. The martial god force that belonged to the Tianming martial god in Fang Yu's body dissipated instantly. Naturally, all of this could not escape the senses of the 17 guardians. But so what? The ant-like kid was able to borrow the power of the martial god realm the first time. Who knew if he could borrow the power of the martial god realm a second time? If the kid was really related to the martial god realm, and they decided to kill him, the martial god realm might even descend from the heaven realm and kill his way to the ancestral land of the heaven palace. The ancestral land of the heaven palace was not worth the risk for them to kill Fang Yu. Besides, the cultivators of the heaven palace would be the ones affected. The son of the king of hell is finally gone. Phew! The 17 guardians finally let out relieved sighs. If they had bodies, they would be soaked in sweat by now. Soon, the guardians began to gloat at his misfortune. After all, everyone knew that the heaven palace and the underworld were sworn enemies. It would not be a good thing for the heaven palace if Fang Yu, who was under the martial god realm, went in. Chapter 930. After a short period of time, Fang Yu arrived at the end of the trial road. Here, there was a deep blue light curtain that led to another space. The 17 guardians obviously misunderstood something. Fang Yu came to a halt and looked behind him. He could still vaguely see the 17 terrifying martial gods that were over 10,000 zhang tall. Then, without any hesitation, Fang Yu stepped into the blue light curtain door. Buzz! At this moment, the key of the heavenly palace floated up and emitted a dazzling white light. A dark silver brand was engraved between Fang Yu's eyebrows. At the same time, the memories of the heavenly palace's inheritance came. From the first palace master to the last palace master 100,000 years ago, all the memories were engraved in Fang Yu's mind. In the blue light curtain door, Fang Yu slowly opened his eyes. His eyes shone with a sharp light. On his forehead, there was a shining imprint. This was the heavenly palace mark, which sealed the sect master's authority. With this mark, all cultivators who cultivated the heavenly palace's cultivation methods and obtained the heavenly palace's inheritance would have to obey Fang Yu's orders. At this moment, Fang Yu suddenly understood why the 2 supreme martial gods fought so fiercely over the authority of the heavenly palace master 100,000 years ago. 1,000,000 years ago, the first palace master founded the heavenly palace. At that time, the heavenly palace was just an ordinary martial god realm force. The real transformation of the heavenly palace was 300,000 years ago. The divine realm had become a legend and the heaven realm was about to go into seclusion and no longer come down to the mortal world. 300,000 years ago, the palace master of the heavenly palace was at the peak of the martial god realm. He developed the heavenly palace to the position of the number 1 martial god realm force. It was also at that time the heavenly palace was chosen by the heaven realm to be the spokesperson in the mortal world. This authority of the heavenly palace was bestowed by the top experts of the heaven realm. With the authority, even if the cultivators of the heavenly palace were stronger than you, they would have to obey the palace master's orders. 100,000 years ago, 2 supreme martial gods of the heavenly palace were born, but there was only one authority of the heavenly palace master. Which of the 2 supreme martial gods would be willing to submit to others and obey the orders of the other supreme martial god? Because of the internal strife, there was no one to inherit the authority of the heavenly palace. Until now, Feng Yu had benefited. In other words, if I awaken these 2 supreme martial gods, with the authority of the heavenly palace, I can mobilize them? Feng Yu's eyes flashed. However, compared to the so-called authority of the heavenly palace, Feng Yu believed in the system's legendary cards more. He still wanted to enslave the 2 supreme martial gods. 2 portals appeared in the space where Feng Yu was. Since Feng Yu had completely inherited the authority of the heavenly palace, there was no need for him to stay here. Of the 2 doors in front of him, one was as hot as the sun, while the other was as cold as the moon. They represented the ancestral land of the heavenly palace, the bright sun and the cold moon in the sky. Let's enslave the heaven martial god first. After all, he was publicly acknowledged as the strongest supreme martial god 100,000 years ago. His reputation is even higher than the Xiantian martial god and the Tianming martial god. Feng Yu walked into the bright yang door. As soon as he stepped in, the crimson sun divine flames burned Feng Yu's body. Buzz! The heavenly palace mark vibrated. At that instant, the crimson sun divine flames scattered like flowing water. This small space was the size of a kingdom. It was filled with all kinds of divine flames burning fiercely. Feng Yu continued forward. The divine flames retreated wherever he passed. After walking for a few hours, Feng Yu finally found the slumbering heavenly venerable martial god with the heavenly palace imprint and the broken bright yang martial god mask in his hand. This space was the kingdom of heaven and earth inside the heaven martial god's body. At the center of the kingdom of heaven and earth, a man wearing a crimson flame armor and holding a giant halberd was standing in the twisted space. His eyes were tightly shut, but even so, he was still standing in the rift with a straight back, emitting a terrifying aura. The strongest of the 3 supreme martial gods, the heaven martial god. He cultivates the laws of supremacy. He's best at fire-related skills and battle skills. Rumor has it that 100,000 years ago, 2/3 of the factions of the 12 martial gods were defeated by the heaven martial god with a single halberd. Even the Xiantian martial god was more famous than the heaven martial god. His reputation and reputation were completely suppressed by the heaven martial god. Feng Yu spoke slowly. A broken mask and a card appeared in his hand. The mask was in pieces. The forehead was engraved with ancient runes, on which something like the sun was glowing. The bright young martial god mask. The mask worn by the heaven martial god before he became a supreme martial god was stained with the fragments of the laws of supremacy when he first entered the martial god realm. Once the mask was placed on the face of the heaven martial god, the heaven martial god, who had been sleeping for 100,000 years, would be guided back from the ghost world. Without any hesitation, Feng Yu placed the mask in his hand, along with the enslavement card, on the face of the man in the crimson flame armor. Buzz! The heaven martial god's figure began to tremble vigorously after the mask was put on. All of a sudden, Feng Yu seemed to have peeped into a magnificent world of the ghost world. Countless dead souls were wandering around. A man in a godly armor was flying toward them under the guidance of the tiny sun on the mask. The heaven martial god's true soul. However, when Feng Yu saw the man in armor, his expression changed drastically. He even sucked in a breath of cold air and was a little frightened. How is this possible? Why does the heaven martial god's true soul look like that? I seem to have seen him in the last scene of the Godslayer's obsession. Fang Yu was extremely terrified. Within the god-slaughtering sword fragment, in the final world of obsession, a woman with a phoenix crown called the God Empress arrived outside the god-slaughtering palace with 9 gods whose divine radiance was as dazzling as the sun. She threatened the king of god-slaughtering. The Godslayer sneered. Holding the godly slaughter sword, he killed the 9 terrifying gods one by one. However, there were still some who escaped. Among the 9 gods, some of their souls had managed to escape. And among the few divine souls that escaped, Fang Yu could guarantee that there was definitely an Empyrean martial god's true soul. In other words, this heaven martial god was not a human cultivator. He was one of the 9 most powerful gods in the realm of the gods 1,000,000 years ago. A terrifying god, either through reincarnation or possession, had given birth to this Empyrean martial god before them. Under normal circumstances, the legendary card should wait for the heaven martial god's true soul to return and brand it on his true soul. Only then would the enslavement be successful. However, at this moment, the legendary card was burning rapidly. In the world of the ghost world, the heaven martial god's true soul that was rushing over released a part of his soul. An inexplicable rule power was activated. The slave seal formed by the legendary card was branded on the part of the soul. Chapter 931. Such a strange scene. Even if Fang Yu was a fool, he could see that something was wrong. Something was wrong with this enslavement. What the hell is going on? That's a legendary card. Could it be as I thought, that the heavenly martial god is actually one of the 9 strongest gods in the deity world? Fang Yu's expression changed drastically. Looking at the heavenly martial god's body in front of him, he seemed to have peeped into the ghost world. The martial god's true soul was looking at him ferociously with eyes full of ridicule. With just a split soul, he had broken the enslavement of the legendary card. To Fang Yu, this was extremely unbelievable. However, this scene had actually happened. Haha. It's almost an interception of the enslavement rules. Such a magical treasure is actually in the hands of an ant like you. It's unbelievable. The heavenly martial god opened his eyes and stared at Fang Yu. At this moment, his true soul was still in the ghost world and had not rushed back. But just this split soul alone was enough for him to talk to Fang Yu. Even if the enslavement mark formed by the legendary card had already been imprinted on this split soul, but there was still a force that resisted Fang Yu, making Fang Yu unable to control this heavenly martial god's body. Wait for me to return to the human world from the ghost hell. I'll be the first to kill you as a blood sacrifice. A mere ant actually dares to dream of enslaving me. You have to know that at the peak of the past, I was one of the 9 peak gods in charge of the deity world. The heavenly martial god was still smiling ferociously. At this moment, Fang Yu made his move. He must not let the heavenly martial god's true soul return. Otherwise, God knows what would happen. It was not only the heavenly martial god that Fang Yu could not enslave. 100,000 years ago, Fang Yu might not be able to enslave Xian Tian martial god, who could fight with the heavenly martial god. Martial god Xian Tian was probably one of the 9 strongest gods when the god world was destroyed. Otherwise, how could he be qualified to compete with an Empyrean martial god? I want to come back. No way. Without the supreme Yang Law fragment on the mask to guide you, you'll be able to find your way. Let's see how you're going to return. Fang Yu rushed forward and grabbed the broken martial god mask. He unleashed all of his power in an attempt to remove the mask. However, the mask did not move at all. With Fang Yu's cultivation as a great venerable, he could even erase a mountain, but he couldn't remove the mask. Seeing this, the mockery in the eyes of the heavenly venerate martial god's remnant soul deepened. Ah! Ant brat, I'm afraid you don't even know what the rules are. Only at the martial god realm can one come into contact with the threshold of the laws. Only those above the martial god realm could control the rules. At the level of extremely powerful gods, they are almost the embodiment of the rules. The fragments of the rules on the mask were left behind when I was trying to break through to the martial god realm. They are one with me. Now that the mask is on my face, the rules are almost one with me. How can you pry it open? How can you pry it open? The Empyrean martial god laughed wildly. The return of his true soul was a foregone conclusion. Speaking of which, this was all thanks to Feng Yu. If it weren't for Feng Yu, even if his true soul was immortal, he would only be able to wander in ghost hell for the rest of his life, and would not be able to find the way to the human world. The power of the rules? If I want to take off the mask, I must be able to pry the power of the rules. Feng Yu took a step back, his eyes flickering as he looked at the Empyrean martial god with a smile. Prying the rules. Feng Yu could actually do it. Seeing this, the Empyrean martial god instinctively felt that something was wrong. But after thinking about it carefully, he immediately sneered again. A small ant was still thousands of miles away from the rule realm. How could he do it? Bravado, what a joke! The Empyrean martial god sneered. However, in the next moment, he saw Feng Yu take out a sword fragment, and he could no longer remain calm. His expression changed drastically, and he was extremely frightened. If it weren't for the enslavement mark on his body, the Empyrean martial god would have jumped up and charged at Feng Yu. How is this possible? The fragment of the God-Slayer's sword. The ruler of the god realm, a quarter of the authority. We've searched for this item for so long and finally found out that it was in the heavenly palace, but why is it in the hands of an ant like you? Could it be that you are the successor of God-Slayer? The Empyrean martial god looked deeply at Feng Yu, and there was a hint of fear in the depths of his eyes. God-Slayer, the most powerful godly king in the history of the god realm. Even if he was severely injured in a fierce battle with the powerful godly kings of other worlds, he could still rely on his own strength to destroy the entire god realm. This God-Slayer sword fragment had awakened the Empyrean martial god's fear of God-Slayer. Feng Yu slowly walked toward him with the God-Slayer sword fragment in his hand. Who says I can't break the rule realm? I think that with this God-Slayer sword's grade, not to mention this puny martial god mask, it can even easily pierce through your martial god body and erase all of your life force. Feng Yu sneered coldly. He stabbed the God-Slayer sword fragment in his hand toward the mask. He wanted to dig the mask out of the Empyrean martial god's face. No. What are you trying to do? Stop, you ant. Stop right now. You and I can talk about any conditions. When my true soul returns, I won't kill you. Why do you have to go to this extent? The Empyrean martial god was finally afraid, and he screamed in terror. If he missed this opportunity, his true soul would have to wait a long time to return to the human world from the ghost hell. With the God-Slayer sword fragment in his hand, Feng Yu was qualified to destroy the Empyrean martial god's body, let alone break the rule realm. Feng Yu didn't care how the Empyrean martial god tempted or threatened him. The God-Slayer sword fragment in his hand easily peeled off the mask. Blood dripped out. Boom. The terrifying force that was trying to resist the enslavement seal instantly vanished. The moment he took off the martial god mask in his hand, it shattered completely. The Empyrean martial god fell silent. His true soul was still in the ghost hell. Without the guiding light, he couldn't find the path to the human world anymore. Whoosh! What a close shave! Unable to sense that terrifying aura, Feng Yu sat on the ground, paralyzed. His clothes were already soaked in cold sweat. Feng Yu hadn't expected this. There were actually 2 mines buried in the Sky Palace ancestral land. He had almost been hit. The first master of the Sky Palace, who had told him the location of the Sky Palace ancestral land, didn't have any good intentions. At the same time, damn it, little bastard! If I return, I'll kill you millions of times. In the distant nether hell, a figure that emitted an incomparably dazzling radiance of divinity roared furiously, and it shook the entire nether hell. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.